I'd like to welcome everybody to City of Saratoga Springs Planning Commission. Today is August 10th, and we would like to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. We've asked Sarah Carroll if she will lead us. Thank you, Sarah. Let's have roll call. We'll start on this side with Commissioner Steele.
Sandra Steele.
Troy Cunningham.
David Funk.
Kirk Wilkins.
Ken Kilgore.
Brian Chapman.
Hayden Williamson. Gordon Miner. David Stroud.
Sarah Carroll.
Thank you, and we have a quorum. All right, this is a public meeting, and we'd like to open up public comment for any items that you have concerns or ideas or thoughts for the city that is not on the agenda. We've set some time aside, so if anybody would like to come forward, we ask you to limit your comments to 3 minutes and state your name and address for the record. Yes. We'll have it. Any others? Okay, we will close public input. Oh, we do have one other? So this is for an item that's not on the agenda, right? Okay, great. Could you state your name and address for the record?
Kenneth Evans.
Ken.
Since the public hearing that was held on July 13th regarding the proposed cell tower, 400 West and Crossroads Boulevard, piece of property that's owned by the city, there's been some relevant changes that have occurred that I wanted to bring to the Planning Commission's attention. They conflict with some of the discussion and the comments that were made according to the minutes of the meeting. Several times Commissioner Kilgore noted that future land use map shows this is regional commercial. There was discussion about the fact that my 20-acre property approximately that is adjacent to this was land use plan, master plan, general plan for regional commercial. There was a comment made by planning that Mr. Evans' idea of commercial along that frontage is good, and we look forward to it coming in. There was discussion by a couple of the Ms. Steele, you made a comment that regarding the fact that since it was going to be on adjacent to regional commercial property, that swayed to some degree your thinking. That wasn't in the minutes, but I remember your comment. On July 18th, the City Council adopted a new general plan. This was not discussed, even though it happened just a few days after the Planning Commission meeting. In that general plan, there were a few changes made according to the minutes. All of the property from the land from 400 West, north of Crossroads Boulevard, to the west, to the next intersection, is now general planned as low density residential. I did not know that I sent an email to each of you regarding my concerns for the 100-foot tower. I did not know that at the time. I do now. I'm changing my concept plan to be able to adapt, develop my property, which I hope to do in this coming year. I'm working on it right now. That's a significant change. I would hope that you would consider that in your deliberations, because a number of you made comments regarding the appropriateness of a 100-foot cell tower or the inappropriateness of it in a residential zone. The preliminary concept plan that I've been working with my engineer on have over 50 homes in relatively close proximity to that cell tower. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Are there any other comments from the public? Okay, we will close public comment at this time. Normally, we will usually respond to these at the time. I guess, do we want to go ahead and address this when we talk about the cell tower, or is this something we should do? All right, let's move on to item number 4. This is a public hearing. This is an administrative recommendation for a preliminary plat for Hawks Estate, Fox Hollow neighborhood, number 10, located at the southeast corner of Wildlife Boulevard and Swainson Avenue. Scott McCord is the applicant, and we'll turn the time over to Senior Planner Sarah Carroll for her presentation.
Okay. Fox Hollow is in the south part of our city. The blue circle indicates where that can be found in the overall city boundary. And then here's a close-up of the property. It's zoned R110 with a PUD overlay. It falls under a master development agreement, which allows quite a bit of flexibility and specifies density for each of the different neighborhoods within Fox Hollow. The one that we're discussing tonight is neighborhood 10. Here's a close-up of the layout proposed for the development. There are several variations proposed. However, the master development agreement does allow quite a bit more density than what's being proposed. They could do an attached product if they chose to. However, they're asking for variations in order to do individual lots and detached single-family homes with a 2.3-acre park in the middle of the development. The variations are listed in the staff report. The lot size minimum is about 4,200 square feet, and then they're asking for some variations to setbacks and lot frontage. Here's a close-up of the setback detail that's being requested. They're asking for 20 feet in the front and 15 feet in the rear. And then on the street side, corner street side, 15 feet, and then 5 foot on the side setbacks. We did have a comment from the DRC regarding the 15 feet street side setback, that this was acceptable to staff as long as they coordinated with the gas company and the electric company to make sure they weren't going to be too close to those utility lines. There are variations being requested, and then an overall staff finding for those criteria and variations outlined in the staff report. There have been similar variations granted in the Fox Hollow development, and they're also including a park. The Fox Hollow development does have extra open space because it's a planned unit development. It has 25% open space for the entire development, and that allowed for greater densities in different neighborhoods. Here's the proposed phasing plan for the development. They're proposing 4 phases. The reason that the phasing boundaries are a bit odd is that they're proposing them along ownership boundaries. There's 2 owners in the development. However, staff does recommend that along with phasing open space, that they phase amenities as well, so that they don't get behind on amenities. They probably need to. We've discussed that with the applicant. One option that they have is to bond for amenities if they're in a later phase of the park. That needs further discussion, and that's a condition in the staff report that they phase those amenities as well. They are proposing 2 different styles of fence, so a semi-private tan vinyl fence along Redwood Road frontage, and then a privacy fence with semi-private top along Wildlife Boulevard. And then there's an entry monument being proposed that's required by the design guidelines. And we received an email from the HOA requesting that they also install an entry monument to the neighborhood as well, not just to Fox Hollow itself, but also to the entrance of neighborhood 10. These are the amenities being proposed. So there is a playground, benches, frisbee golf being proposed, and then a soccer field in the middle of the park. Regarding this particular playground, staff didn't have any concerns with it. The HOA has requested that they coordinate the particular brand of playground, and maybe discuss that with the HOA prior to installing it. If we choose that, then we might not want to approve this specific one and allow them to coordinate with the HOA and staff when they get further down the road. Here is the landscape plan. On the perimeter of the park, you see trees and planter beds, and then the playground in the center of the park, you see a grass area that allows for a soccer field in the center of the park. And then they do have some landscaping along Redwood Road, and I believe that portion of a trail you're seeing is in. If it's not in, they need to complete that as well. Because it's a planned unit development, they also need architectural review. Through this process, they have some options that they've provided, and they've received feedback from the HOA. So the the notes you're seeing in red are feedback from the HOA, and then there's a letter included in the packet as well that the HOA grants kind of conditional or approval of these subject to further review and meeting their design requirements and points requirements. So all of these would be 2-story homes based on the size of the lot and such, and there are some examples in here. These were also reviewed by the Urban Design Committee, in earlier versions they didn't have 2 materials on the front, and that option has been eliminated from the set that's included here. Here are the HOA comments that I mentioned. The first one is regarding the entry sign, that they would need one in front of the main entrance to the neighborhood 10 as well. The HOA had a comment regarding evergreen trees. They have a real struggle having evergreen trees survive in the soils in Saratoga Springs, and they would like to suggest or request that instead that they consider hardy sycamore trees or hardy deciduous trees such as sycamore, ash, chokecherry, etc. They asked if the fencing along Redwood Road could match the existing adjacent development, and the plans indicate that it does. They would like to work with the applicant on the playground selection, and then the HOA rule regarding similar development states no same home shall be built on 2 lots on either side or on 3 lots across the street. So this is different from the condition in the staff report. And then staff does recommend approval with the conditions. Condition number 3 is the one that isn't worded exactly how the HOA has it worded in their requirements. And then the entrance sign they're proposing meets the city requirements. We ask for an HOA approval letter as well for that particular sign, and that all other code requirements shall be met, and that the open space amenities shall be phased.
Thank you for that presentation. Is the applicant here? You can come and join us. You can go ahead and have a seat if you like. And would you state your name and address for the record, please?
I'm Mark Greenwood. I'm with ALM Engineering. I've been asked by Mr. McCord to attend tonight. He was unable to be here, so I'll be representing him.
Thank you. Mr. Greenwood, would you like to add anything to the presentation?
Well, I appreciate Sarah. She's been great to work with. The staff's been good. We've enjoyed the working relationship and trying to work through some difficult issues technically and in planning state, and appreciate their time and efforts there. This is a property that I've been involved with for quite some time. Back when the original development agreement and development was done many years ago. Unfortunately, it kind of fell apart, as most of you know, with the change in the economy, and was happy when the new master development agreement was reached and things kind of picked up. So I've actually designed another plan for this many years ago that, well, I say many years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, that was much more dense, and I think we had somewhere around 130 some odd units on the property. But when Mr. McCord purchased this property, or one portion of this property, and Mr. McCory, who has the other portion, was working on it, they decided that they wanted to do something a little bit different, something a little more in tune with the rest of the neighborhood, and wanted to go to the detached single lot type concept. It was a great expense to them because it reduced their development numbers quite a bit. But it fits. It fits better with what they were trying to do. So we sat down and through many iterations came up with this plan to work with them on, and seems like so far everybody's happy with that. And as far as details or the project, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have in regards to that.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we open public comment, just want to note that this is an administrative recommendation. So basically, the decision that would be before us or before the city council would be based upon city code that exists and Utah state law. It's not based upon public clamor or ideas or feelings about it. It's based upon what's in the code because they have rights. But saying that, we would like to open up public comment at this time. The things that we can make a decision on are evidence based upon code and state law. So we'll open it up at this time for item number 4. Hey there.
Good evening. My name is Tanya Parker. I'm 2833 Cottontail Loop. I'm the Villages at Saratoga Springs HOA president. I just wanted to take a few moments and to first of all thank the staff for all the hard work that they've put into this plan. I know it's been in the works for a while. Also, Mr. McCord and Mr. Greenwood, they've put a lot of work into it. The HOA has actually worked very closely with the developer on the development of this particular neighborhood, and we appreciate the open space, how it really ties in the neighborhood. We feel like it's going to be a great addition to the HOA overall, because we're in that area we seem to be lacking open spaces. So this would be a wonderful addition. We really appreciate that. A couple of comments that we've made. The board made, Sarah already pointed them out, so thank you for that. Just something to consider going forward. The reason why we would like some flexibility with working on the developer on the particular playground structure is because those things change. So if we approve a particular structure today, or if you guys approve a particular structure today, it may or may not be available a couple years down the road when it actually goes in. So we don't necessarily want to be stuck per se with something that may no longer be manufactured. So a little bit of flexibility would be very beneficial to the HOA, and I'm sure the developer as well. We're very sensible when it comes to, the funds, of course. So we would make the best possible decision for the developer and for the HOA because we know the needs. So if you can please consider that, we'd really appreciate it. As I mentioned, we welcome Fox Estates to the Villages family. It would be great, and we'll be happy to work with the developer on a continued basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments for item number 4?
I don't have so much of a comment as I do a question. I don't know if it can be answered.
Could you state your name and
My name
address?
is Marshall Bear, 151 Swainson. My question is the timeline. What is the proposed timeline, or what do you think the timeline is going to be for each phase?
We're going to answer questions after we've closed public comment, but we're noting them down. And if you had anything else, we're going to take notes, and then we'll answer them after public comment is closed. Okay. Thank you for your question, Mr. Barrett. Any other comments? Okay, then we will close public comment at this time, and we'll answer some of the questions that we have. Go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries.
As far as the timeline goes, we're intending to start in April of 2016. I think we're a little behind. So, yeah. I'm sorry, can you hear me okay?
Light on it. It's just everybody's quiet today, so.
I can speak louder if
Okay.
needed. We're intending to move as quickly as possible on the project. Matter of fact, Mr. McCord contacted me recently, and we've actually already started designing the finals for phase 2, and so it's highly probable that as we start into phase 1, that phase 2 will be moving right forward, and they'll probably do them both simultaneously if possible. So the timing is really just as soon as we can get started. My guess is within approval, probably 60 to 90 days after that would begin.
Okay, and I think that's all the questions that we had for the. Okay, did you want to clarify in additional phases when you thought they would go?
Well, as we move into the additional phases, it was originally planned as a 3-year project. I don't know if it'll do that. We've got a couple of stipulations that we're trying to work out with the other owner on the other property, who's also a party to this as well. But Mr. McQuarrie has a couple of items that we're trying to resolve. He's recently signed an agreement to sell his portion to Mr. McCord and continue that on. They've yet to complete that, but if they do, I'm sure they'll move ahead just as fast as they could with each phase.
Okay, thank you very much. We will go ahead and open this up to the Planning Commission. Commissioner Steele.
I want to make sure that I understood, Sarah, that the issue from the DRC with the 20 feet for the corner is not a problem anymore.
The applicant addressed that in the checklist, and really we brought that up quite regularly just so that they're aware. There are other ways it can be handled, but they have to coordinate with our company that did the building or gas.
And is the site triangle going to be sufficient with the 15 feet?
Oh, we did look at that, and it was. We didn't get a diagram though, huh? About it.
We can
We
provide
talked
one.
about it, and they were going to work on a diagram to show that. As far as I'm informed, it is, but I did get that diagram.
Okay, thank you. This is one of those things that is an opinion, and I would address this, I guess, to Ms. Parker. I noticed that there's one of the elevations that says that the posts need to be larger. In my opinion, option 1 needs larger posts. They look a little small to hold up that porch cover. And then on the option number 3, it also needs to have a little bigger post. And it has been brought to my attention that we have probably been quite lax in not looking at the rear elevations of homes when they face a public street. And this will, I believe this one will face wildlife. And there's a few that are, the backs of them, I shouldn't say facing, the backs of them will be to wildlife, and then there's about 3 lots that will back up onto redwood. And I know the HOA has said that there's some points that need to be, they need to have more points in your HOA, architectural document, I guess I should say. And I'm wondering if, I've looked at them, and they are pretty plain on the back. And I wonder if maybe shutters on those windows that are on those homes that are backing up to a public street, if that would help some. And so to both of you, I will put that forward. And I think that's it.
Mr. Chair, I just have a quick clarification, if you could. What is the authority or responsibility of the Planning Commission balancing developer rights, HOA requests for fencing and for signage for the playground? But what is our responsibility that relationship?
In a planned unit development, we have a little bit of flexibility where they have design guidelines, and their design guidelines are something that the city, that's in their master development agreement, which is part of the contract with the city. So we do have some flexibility. Part of what you're asking is a legal question. I'm not sure I know the answer.
We could certainly just take it also as public comment too.
Right.
With any other public comment.
The fence comment, we had already required that of them, so what they're asking is consistent. There's just something in the design guidelines that asks for a different type of fence, but where it's such a, so you can see here, it's just a short section of fence, and then this fence is already in. So this development here has the fence into full length. So rather than having two different styles, because we also have a requirement in our city code that the fencing be consistent. And so there's something in the design guidelines that requires the wrought iron with the pillars, but this fence right here is the semi-private tan vinyl and goes quite a length down to the next entrance. And so to have this little section be a different type of fence is inconsistent with city code. Generally, city code would, the city has to enforce city codes, not the design guidelines.
Just hypothetically, if the developer was willing to develop, and there was an existing HOA that had requirements more stringent than the city's, you don't have to worry about that. The city's going to work with.
Right, that's correct. The city doesn't enforce HOA requirements. The only reason that we do to a certain extent in this is because some of those requirements are in the master development agreement.
My question's same thing, but specifically when we're dealing with things like the playground equipment and stuff like that. I understand the need for flexibility. I understand the giving the developer and the HOA the opportunity to work together. I do have some concerns in giving the HOA teeth in that agreement. I would like to leave it open and flexible and yet not say they have to come to an agreement in writing or something like that. How would we do that in a condition to where we can give them, the developer, the flexibility to use something different that's in here, work with the HOA without giving the HOA a 50% say in what they do?
You can word it so that they coordinate with the HOA and final approval is by staff.
Okay.
If I could, one thing that I'd like to point out was when this development agreement was resurrected back in 2012 or something like
Right.
that, we had a lot of different property owners, we had a lot of people coming together, and quite honestly, the HOA was what held together this development during that time. So from a staff perspective, I would grant a great deal of deference to the HOA because they really did an amazing job of holding together their neighborhood, and the current president and the past presidents have done a great job in working with all of the parties with this. It's a very complex issue, especially as we're trying to marry together developments today under this new agreement along with the old improvements that were built. So I think from a staff perspective, we're going to work closely with them. You can certainly recommend that, but I think we're going to be giving a tremendous amount of deference to them, and so I would suggest have the developer really get it nailed down, because we're going to be looking for the gold star from the HOA on this one.
Also, I don't think we're granting an HOA any future authority just because we take a comment, a suggestion that actually makes a lot of sense. If our process requires the applicant to lock down a playground equipment, for example, and sure enough, 6 months later or a year later, either that model is no longer made or it costs more, for whatever reason, then it's our process that needs to be changed. And an HOA who makes those suggestions, that's a good suggestion, but it doesn't necessarily give them any kind of authority over approval process in the future. So I think it's a good suggestion.
Please.
I've got a couple things. First of all, I did have similar comments on the HOA, other than I would like to preface it by saying I'm not a fan of HOAs, but I lean toward everything that was presented. I think that the requests that they've given are reasonable. I think that we may want to amend condition number 3 to match what the HOA has requested, since that's similar to what we normally request. And And I think that recently I've been out visiting grandchildren in other areas of the country and going to some of the parks and looking at what's there and what the kids are using, what they enjoy playing on and what they don't enjoy playing on, and I recognize that there's so many different kinds, and so I have no problem with something similar within the same price range. I think that that's not a hardship on the builder to have the HOA work with them a little bit on that. Now getting on to some of the other concerns I have on, what is it, Swinson Avenue. There's housing are going to be, I didn't go out and actually walk along this, so I don't know. But there's lots anyway across the street, and I don't know what size of lots those are, but I have concerns having large lots and small lots together. So I'm just somewhat concerned about that. I do note that the smallest lots are not right in that area, so you know that's good. I'm also a little concerned. I'm not a big fan of multi-family housing, although it is a necessity, and I recognize that you're trying to make these single homes. I'm just a little concerned about if we approve this, and apparently we've approved this in some of the other parts of this development. I'm just concerned if we approve this, what is going to keep other developers from coming in and requesting exactly the same thing. Not saying that what you have is wrong, but it is against our making changes to what our normal allowances are, and so I'm somewhat concerned about that. I was also a little concerned about some of the floor plans, just from a personal perspective. One thing I look at when I look at a home, I walk in, I look to see where the living area is, where the kitchen area is, and every plan that you had that laid out fine. I had no problem with that. But whenever I invite other people over, which is somewhat often, I look for where do I have to send them to the closest restroom. And some of those plans, they had to go upstairs or downstairs. Some of them they even had to go through other rooms to get into a restroom. And so that's something you might want to look at. It's just, my personal way of looking at things, but I look at, because like I said, I invite people over to my home quite often, and I like to have a restroom somewhere nearby where they can use it, where I don't have to clean up the whole rest of my house for them to walk through to get to it. Yeah, that's part of it. Anyway, that's the only, and I realize that that's just a thought for you to look at. Nothing, nothing that we actually want to put in as a condition or anything, because, like I said, your plans are good plans. It's not.
That's a very good point. As I'm getting older, I realize a lot of those things I used to think were great, like an office in a downstairs room or having to run those stairs isn't as much fun as it used to be. But if you're having a lot of people come over, you're either very well liked or you're in trouble a lot. So it's one of the two. But no, those are really good sense. In the home I'm living in now, we did a similar thing. We put a small restroom on the main floor, and just as a guest room, and I'm surprised at how much more it gets used than when we didn't have one on the main floor. And so I understand that. That's a very good point. Thank you for making that suggestion.
Good. Just want to remind everybody this is an administrative decision for a plot amendment only. So we're not approving homes, we're not approving styles, we're not approving things like that.
I had couple questions. So the HOA letter mentioned a Rambler that was going to be limited to homes per phase. I didn't see, not sure exactly which home they were talking about in there. Has that been resolved already?
There's not a Rambler being proposed.
Okay. All right. So we don't have to worry about that, is what I'm hearing. No. Okay. All right, fine. On the, what else was I going to say? I had some really, really good stuff I wanted to say. To one comment about, the Commissioner Funk said about other developers wanting to do this. Personally, any developer that wants to take it down from 142 units down to 160, I will embrace throughout the city. So I really don't have any concerns about that. I typically am not a fan of very small lots like this, but considering where you guys are and where you guys are going, I couldn't be a bigger fan of what you're doing here. So thank you very much for that. And I feel like it's going to fit the neighborhood and the city much better. I really like the amenities. And now that I don't have young kids, I'm getting to that point in my life where all of a sudden small lots start to make a lot more sense, and I'm a lot more excited about them. So I think this will be a great asset to the community. So to staff, all the conditions we have are the things that regarding the HOA and the developer, all things that are either required by code or the PUD. And the only condition that we'd have to have that's kind of outside of the additional one be essentially giving them some flexibility on the playground equipment. Is that correct? Okay.
Before we go to a motion, I don't think we're done.
I'm just asking some questions.
Oh, okay.
I'm not
You
ready to
look
do the
like you're
motion.
ready.
Yep, I'm ready. Here we go. And I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Funk.
I did have one more comment on the disc golf, which I am a proponent for, but I was a little concerned that there was only 4 of them, and I don't know if any of you ever played it, but when you've only got 4 holes, you know, if you've gone golfing, you don't golf for 4 holes. I mean, you that just had a little concern with me on that.
I can remember up on, it used to be the old Seven Peaks Golf Course that was down in Provo. And prior to closing, they had a number of disc golf posts that were put up in there. And I remember thinking to myself that it'd be awfully fun to play from the top down. Going the other direction was a long way, so 4 would have been fine going if I had to go uphill. But no, I see your point. I don't think that's a problem to add more. That's if that's necessary. It's not a game I play a ton of, but whatever would be appropriate is, I think, just fine.
While we're on Frisbee golf, I'm not necessarily against Frisbee golf, but I've been into a park in Salt Lake where I've seen conflicts between the playground equipment and the Frisbee golfers. And what I've witnessed is the Frisbee golfers are less than forgiving to those who encroach on their greens or whatever you want to call them. So just when you're placing them, make sure we avoid the conflicts between the playground users and the Frisbee golfers.
That's a good point.
I have a question. It's always, and I'm not sure about Utah law, but in other areas where I've worked, the most restrictive between an HOA and the city is the one that rules. And could our city manager or our planner or is somebody, do you know if that's true in Utah too?
So in Utah, the city enforces the city code, and the HOA's restrictions can be greater, but the HOA enforces those, not the city.
So even if we don't fix the mix where they don't repeat, then the HOA will.
Right.
Okay.
I would say can. I'm not sure they will, but they have that right.
Right. So number 3, if that wasn't changed and the HOA is more restrictive, the HOA is still subject to enforcing that. Right.
If I can make one comment, and I didn't have a chance to speak to Tanya before she got up, but I've been doing this for 25 years, and done countless numbers of HOAs, and most of them have been very difficult to work with as time goes on, especially as you get 30 different chiefs trying to run the HOA. It just becomes very difficult. I've met with Tanya. I can't remember if it was in your home. It was in someone's home as we sat there, and as I got to meet the people that were working on this HOA, it was very refreshing to me to see them so unified in what they wanted. They were very open to listening to the thoughts and what we had, and I don't remember necessarily some of the specifics of the discussion, but I remember leaving there thinking, this is the way an HOA should be run. This is the way they're supposed to be done, and I've done so many of them that it stood out. And so I'm very happy and excited to be working with this HOA on these issues. So I'm sure, at least to the extent of my ability, we'll push to try to make sure we make them and accommodate the things that they need.
Thank you. Any other comments?
In the staff report, it says that the setbacks and lot size variances that are requested are similar to the surrounding neighborhoods. So are they similar, or are they pretty much the same? I mean, as far as there's not going to be a big difference between these small setbacks and small lot sizes for this neighborhood as there would be for the surrounding neighborhood. Is that a good assumption?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Good assumption.
Okay. Yeah, because for example, the lot size required is less than 1/2, or the variance requested for the lot size is less than 1/2 of what's required. And so we granted those to the other neighborhoods as well, and that's because it's part of the master,
Right.
the PUD and the MDA, their master development agreement as well.
Right.
Okay. How can you answer how was the design, the DRC? How did it feel about the applicant's response regarding the 20-foot in front and corner side yard setbacks for the utility concerns? Are they okay with the response from the applicant?
You know, we dealt with another development, and I don't know exactly how it got resolved, but they intended for the gas line to be put in another location, and when it was all on paper and on the ground, the people who do the installations for the gas company were so used to doing it one particular way that they thought the drawings were wrong, and so they went ahead and did it the way they always do it. So there just has to be a lot of coordination for it to not have issues.
Okay, so DRC's okay with the response, I guess.
Right.
It's just going to require.
We're okay with that, but that coordination has to be on the developer.
What's the plan for the sidewalk along Redwood Road, south of Wildlife Boulevard? It just goes to a certain extent and it just stops?
No, it connects onto an existing sidewalk that's already there.
It connects down to Heron Hills now.
It does now.
So
okay,
Heron
so
Hills has a road that comes down. Yeah, the sidewalk has been completed. That whole sidewalk is connected.
Okay, great.
Which is, I think, part of the continuity question of the fence is already built.
Right.
Do you just continue that to the corner so that you have consistency amongst? It's a very long stretch.
Okay. Just wanted the applicant to know on your landscape notes. There are two of them. Required weed barrier fabric, but the city no longer requires that. So you could put it in if you want to, but
unfortunately, even silk plants die at my house, so I'm not the landscape architect,
okay.
But I'll certainly pass that on.
Okay, yeah, because it's in there required, and some developers put that in there because it was in the city code, but it's no longer. So okay.
We can pass that on.
Then how is the applicant regarding the HOA redundancy rule with no houses for 3 lots in front and then 2 on each side, because you only have 5 options. So I don't know what the algorithm is, but I don't know if it's possible to do all that with 3 in front and 2 on either side.
I discussed this when this came back with Mr. McCord and discussed those options, and we kind of saw what was happening. We figured that it was still possible, we were still okay with it, and if there was any kind of a conflict that would come up, we'd certainly bring it back to the HOA or the city if needed and see if that could be.
And then, we need to add a condition about playground flexibility, or are we just leaving that to the applicant working it out with the HOA?
No, a condition would be better when we grant these approvals, we hold them to the playground that they have in their packet.
Okay.
So it would be an amendment to their drawings to change it later. So we would, not an amendment that has to come to you, but an amendment to their plan set, their approved plan set. So we would, if that's going to be changed later, we would want that flexibility in the condition that they can put in a similar playground.
Okay, then I do recommend that we put if the rest of the planning commission agrees, that we put a condition in to let the playground be flexible so that the applicant does not have to make an amendment.
Noted.
With staff approval, maybe?
That's what I have. From our discussion, we've talked about coordinating with staff and final approval to put in similar playground and then flexible. That's what I have.
That's all I have.
Any other comments from the planning commission? I just had a question. We've closed public comment. I'll allow that. Would you come forward, please, and state your name and we're going to reopen public comment for a minute, just so he can stay. Please state your name and address for the record.
Gordon Knapp, 3334 South Peregrine Trail.
Thank you. Thank you, Gordon. Please go ahead.
Unlike David Funk, I like HOAs, and that's why I moved in our neighborhood. And the only problem that I've seen as far as the HOA takes care of the front and the city takes care of the back, right? Is the way it is now?
For this development, what I understand is that the HOA is going to be maintaining all of it. Is that correct?
I have a little more background on that. Along Swainson Boulevard, the warranty period is up, and I've received an email from the HOA asking who's supposed to be maintaining that. The assumption is that it's city right-of-way, so anyway, right now the right-of-way, the park strip along Swainson isn't being used. To look at the development agreement and see if that's supposed to be the city. And so that's what's being referenced here, is that Redwood Road is getting maintained, but the park strips along Swainson are.
Okay, well anyway, we've run into the situation where the front yards and the side yards are good, but the backyards sometimes don't ever get finished because we're told the city takes care of that. But when we get a hold of the city, they say, well, if you can see it from the street, then they'll do something, but if you can't see it from the street, they won't do anything. Well, if you can drive around the neighborhood, you might not be able to see it from the street where the house is facing, but you can see it from other streets, when you can look up and see that weeds are this high and they're not being taken care of. Now, that's a pretty major problem if you want to maintain a decent outlook for your neighborhood and keep the values up. If you don't care about the values, then you can do anything you want to do. And like David Funk, if he doesn't like HOA, then he shouldn't move in an HOA neighborhood. That's the way I see it, for anybody else. Now, as far as these houses being located on this Peregrine Trail, they're and especially down on Hawk Drive, they're pretty close together, and most people have at least 2 cars. Some have 3, some have 4. And these houses are so close together, where they're going to put all those cars? There's not even going to be room to park them on the street. You can see right now it's a problem when you drive around the neighborhood because the houses are that close together, and these are even closer now than the ones that are currently in the neighborhood. These houses are even closer together. the driveways are too short to hold the cars. And in the front of the house, there's not space enough to put more than maybe one car, usually. So where are you gonna put all these cars? These small lots? Could we have some kind of a parking area somewhere that every so often that you have a little parking area maybe or something? I don't know. But I can see what it's gonna happen is when the cars are parked on both sides of the road, you've got to wait for a car to go through before you can go through. And when it comes time for the snow plows in the winter, that's going to be a real problem. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you for your comments. Those are valid comments. We've had the same discussion about other, yes, and we're going to go ahead and reclose public comment at this time. We have had similar discussions about other developments. I'm surprised we haven't discussed that in this one. Let's turn that over to the developer. Could you please address snow removal and parking, both in the driveway and for additional vehicles, and how that's going to be handled?
Sure. I could be mistaken. I'm thinking snow removal is part of the HOA. Not sure it's not. It's city. Okay. Oh well, yeah, on the street it would be. I'm thinking about for the individual driveways and whatnot, but I don't know. We have, as far as parking goes, we've that 20-foot setback in the front is what we're planning on being. There's typically enough room there for 2 cars on that driveway to park in front of the garage. These do have garages, so that the owner's cars would most likely be inside the garages, we would hope. So we're thinking that would be sufficient for those requirements. It typically is on developments of this nature anyway.
And again, before us today is not the decision to make a decision on the lot, on the driveways. This is a preliminary plat. We'll be able to look at that one again. So you should receive a notice. You can come again when we have the actual measurements for the driveways and everything.
The final plat won't get noticed, but all of the driveways are required to be 20 feet, and all of the homes are required to have a 2-car garage.
Any other comments from the planning commission?
Also, I thought also on the was it in the engineering report where it did say that the roads were wide enough for fire trucks to get through and to and had the proper widths and everything like that. So I thought I saw that on the engineering report.
These are 56-foot right-of-ways, so that's the standard that you see throughout the city right now. These are vested under the time they were submitted. We recently adopted an amendment to make the asphalt a bit wider in our cross sections, and that doesn't apply to this application. So this meets the standard that you've seen throughout the city for public roads.
Oh, and then the question about who enforces the backyard in this case. I think the comment was right. Is if the city could only enforce it, they could see it from the front.
City code requires backyards to be in within 2 years. However, we have a lot of flexibility on what's considered landscaping.
And weeds.
So if there's an issue, what they should do is submit those addresses to code enforcement so that code enforcement can start citing those property owners that need to install their, if there's an area of concern that doesn't have their backyards in, then please let us know those addresses and we will submit that to code enforcement. It's not.
Okay. We addressed all of our questions. I'll entertain a motion.
Sir, could you bring the motion up? All right, based upon the evidence and explanations received today, I move that the Planning Commission well, before I do this, do we need to change condition 3, or is that consistent with code? And then if the HOA has more stringent requirements, they can then choose to enforce that or not?
They can change it so that it's consistent with the HOA design guidelines because those are part of the master development agreement.
Okay, so that is, because it's part of the master development agreement, now it's part of code with this development.
I would have to double check if that exact requirement is in the master development agreement, but the design guidelines are part of the master. This isn't code. This isn't code. This was suggested by the development review committee, which is staff, when we reviewed the elevations, because it's a requirement that in a PUD we review the elevations, and so that was a recommendation by the development review committee regarding architectural review.
And you're talking about option 3 here?
Right.
But if it's not code, we can't necessarily enforce it through a condition, correct?
The PUD, the way that it's written, you're right. It requires. So now there are standards in there. Before there weren't specific standards for residential development, and now there are. So I believe Kevin would say no, we can't enforce that.
Okay.
But so he's not here, so I can't.
If we can leave this, if we leave it as it is, then the HOA can work with the developer to make sure he's compliant with their additional requirements, correct?
Right.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be there, actually. It can just be struck, and the HOA can enforce their design requirements.
Are they already, I mean, do they, well, I guess they don't have this in the preliminary plat here, those requirements, but they normally wouldn't, right?
Say that again?
Well, they normally wouldn't have that kind of detail in the preliminary plat as to spacing and stuff like that. Anyway.
Well,
if you're all right with it, we'll just leave it as is, and we'll just add that additional condition.
Because you're correct that it's not a code requirement.
Okay. Based upon the evidence and explanations received today, I move that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for the approval of Fox Hollow Neighborhood 10 preliminary plat located approximately 3200 South Redwood Road, with the findings and conditions in the staff report, with the exception that condition 3 be struck and an additional condition be put in to where the developer will have flexibility in regards to playground equipment, to have consistent playground equipment with what is in the staff report, allow him to work with the HOA, and staff will give final approval. Does that work?
Second.
I think that handled it. We have a second. We have a motion and a second. Is there a question on the motion? So I have a question. I just wanted to make sure. The condition was that the builder or the applicant is to coordinate with staff in the final approval to put in similar playground and be flexible. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Second?
That's fine.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Let's move on to item number 5. This is a continued item from July 13th, 2017. It's a legislative recommendation for proposed code amendments to Title 19, City Initiated. Sarah, did you have a presentation for the changes?
I do. Okay, in the staff report, I made a point to highlight the things that were new from the last meeting. One of the main comments we got regarding the changes related to regional parks, were that instead of having a section that spelled out exceptions, that we could either reword that or add it to the related section. So it was difficult to find a way to reword it so that we didn't use the word exception. So instead, I've changed it to add modifications to each of the relevant sections. So in, I'll go through this really quick. So in definitions, we added a definition for regional park, and then that has been modified from your last packet. And then we, the updated definition for public and private utility buildings is the same as you saw last time. In supplementary regulations, so part of this discussion is related to cell towers, part of the changes are related to regional parks, and then part of the changes are related to public utility facilities. So we have 3 areas of focus with these particular changes. So in supplementary regulations, we added that cell towers can be located on existing light poles or power poles, and that they could be 10 feet taller than the pole and the same color, and that would allow for a singular antenna in those situations. We changed the height for cell towers in the RC zone from 40 feet to 50 feet, so you can discuss whether or not you support that, or if you would like to recommend height changes in other zones, we can look at that as well. The proposed height for cell towers in a park or utility or at a utility site has been added as an amendment. That's up for discussion as well, whether or not you support those changes related to height for cell towers in those particular situations. For landscaping, we added changes related to regional parks. There's right now a requirement that you can't have more than 70% max turf. However, when you're adding ball fields, that is difficult to accomplish. So we want to eliminate that requirement for regional parks, which would be parks that are 20 acres and larger. We may want to consider that in the future for other parks as well. Landscaping, we modified screening requirements for regional parks. There's a requirement that if a parking lot is adjacent to right-of-way, that there needs to be a berm or a wall or a hedge. And so we modified that could be accomplished through intermittent planter beds. And then for lighting, there were several modifications. One was related to sports field lighting. The change is suggested that it go from 70 feet to 80 feet as the max height for sports field lighting. And then there's a proposal to increase the color temperature for sports field lighting. And then also there's language added related to theme lighting for sports complexes. You'll also see that in Neptune Park, or not just for sports complexes, but for parks. In Neptune Park, you'll see that the theme lighting is taller than 10 feet. And with the size of the walkways in the larger parks, that's to accomplish a broader coverage on the walkways for safety. And also for theming, that the light pole and design could enhance the theming. For the conditional use permit section, there's there's language allowing chain link fencing around utility sites. And then the language that was previously in there last time you saw this was related to the definition for the public and private utility buildings and facilities. And then there are specifications relating to landscape exemptions. And I'll give an example of at least one reason why we want to include that. Currently, in the near future, you'll be seeing a pond site. And what that pond site will be accomplishing is secondary water storage for additional capacity in the city. However, even though we're pumping water to the pond, we don't have irrigation around that site, so it doesn't necessarily make sense to landscape that particular site. We saw this also with the new water tank that's coming in the Mount Saratoga development, that although we're putting a water tank there, we don't have irrigation pressure or lines in that particular location, so it needed to be native vegetation. So there's some exemptions related to landscaping for public utility sites.
Sarah, if I could real quickly also on that, with for example, the pond site, the state dam safety wouldn't allow us to put any vegetation on the facade of the dam itself. It would compromise the structure. So, I mean, there's nuances associated with it as well that limit what we can do with these particular parcels as well.
And then for 1916, there's a proposal, and it's the same as the, at 1906 in the report says landscaping, but 1906 is parking, so I apologize for that typo. So 1906 and 1916 are similar requirements related to a berm or a hedge to screen parks that abut or parking lots that abut right of way. And then there's been some changes proposed for the signage section related to regional parks, and allowing logos on backstops, allowing an entry monument that the city council chooses, allowing sponsors to have plaques in the park subject to approval by the city, and then also allowing electronic scoreboards, but not allowing any electronic messaging or advertising on that scoreboard. There could be a logo or something like that, but that could not be an electronic feature. And I'll pull up the different sections if you'd like me to, if you have questions on specific sections.
All right.
Sorry, I did have some fun pictures. I'll keep going for just a second. Cell tower discussion might be a bigger, we have an application for a cell tower following this. So we asked a couple of questions related to the cell tower topic. And I want to go through those just a little bit. Sorry, I had more for this presentation. So lower height. So we have just a few zones that allow 100-foot towers. Agriculture zone and I believe industrial zone. And then in the proposal right now, it's suggesting that we allow 100 feet in parks. That's obviously up for discussion and could be a concern for people that live near parks. There's an increased, so we could discuss allowing an increased height in some of the zones, and which zone, if we do that, which zones would be appropriate. When these are next to high power transmission lines, which are really tall anyway, they tend to blend in, not necessarily, you know, they tend to blend in because you already have a lot of tall poles. However, they can't be in the corridor. And so they could be adjacent to it, but there is a distance requirement. I don't know that exact number, but there's a distance requirement, one for safety from the power company. They can't go on top of them because they would have to shut down power to have them installed. So they can't go on top of transmission lines. They could go near the transmission corridors, but they still need a certain distance from them so that there's not interference from the power lines and the cell towers. Is camouflaging or stealth design better? So that's a topic that that we can discuss. And so I have some examples. So this is a existing cell tower that got approval in our city that is on 400 South. So it's right across the street from the D.R. Horton development, the Legacy Farms development. This one, I believe, is 100 feet. And so here's an example of one that has stealth design. Obviously, this is in a forest, and it would stand out even more so not in a forest. And then you see palm trees in other locations, you know, so if you want to add some palm trees to the city. This one is on approximately 2300 North in Redwood, so as you're heading north on Redwood Road, this is one that has approval in our city that's been there for a while. So here's some other stealth design, or I don't know if it's stealth or camouflage or things like that, but I wanted to present the images just for discussion purposes because there are some things in the code about if these are in a park, they have to be camouflaged. Obviously in a park, the 100-foot is proposed, but if something shorter was proposed, it means there has to be more of them. And then you do have to have a fence around the bottom of these and things like that, so they do take up square footage wherever they go on the ground as well. So here's an image of one you can see at Pioneer Crossing in Mill Pond Road, which is in Lehigh. So there's a silo. I'm not exactly sure the purpose of the silo, but you see cell towers wrapping this. I don't know if that adds a level of camouflage or not. And then here's some examples I found on the web just of more architecturally designed camouflage structures for cell towers. And then I just took a screenshot of some that are on the web. And then I also realized that Flickr has a whole gallery of trees, of cell tower trees. So if you're interested in seeing those, I could open that up. And then one thing I wanted to point out here is, so the following item on the agenda is for AT&T. We're also having discussions with Sprint and have been on and off for a couple months, and they are looking at cell tower sites in the south part of our city. And what they provided here is a propagation map based on a 35-foot pole versus a 100-foot pole. And they're looking right now at the school sites which would be Saratoga Shores and Sage Hills Elementary, and the max height there would be 35 feet. You can see from these maps that at the 35-foot limit that you still have a lot of gaps, which would obviously mean more poles in the city. And I don't know that a lower height makes them, you know, I think it might make them less visible, but not necessarily more attractive. Right? Right. And then, so this was forwarded in an email just shortly before the meeting, so if you didn't all get a chance to read it, I just want to cover that quickly. So the summary here from the Sprint representative is that shorter heights means more poles, you know, so to get the coverage they need, they're, you know, between the two maps, you're going to see more requests for more poles. And then their other concerns are co-locating. So Sprint is just one applicant we're talking to. AT&T is another applicant we're talking to. I'm sure you have other ideas of, you know, there's Verizon and T-Mobile, and I'm sure there's others in the area as well. So the taller the tower, the more you can put on it. If you have a 100-foot tower, you can put 3 or 4 on them. If you have a 35 or 40-foot tower, you just get 1. That was all in here for discussion related to camouflage and height for cell towers, and then obviously that could lead into some of the discussion for the next item. And then staff's recommending approval of the proposed amendments. Of course, we're open to discussion and modification.
Mark, you had a question?
Just more of a comment. I think, you know, we all kind of snicker when we see the trees because they really stand out, or the camouflage trees. I think if you're a smaller or a shorter tower, I think it's going to camouflage much better than a 100-foot tree in the middle of nowhere. But for example, you know, there's examples of camouflaging or installing cell tower equipment on, like, for example, sports lighting or something like that, so that it would virtually disappear in that kind of an environment. We already have a cell tower towards the sports complex, but in theory, you know, at the high school, you could probably put some cell tower structure already on an intrusive light structure and camouflage it, and it's taller and it's going to give, you know, better coverage in some of those areas. So I think the idea of camouflage is something that we should really consider. Yes, they're all ugly. Yes, it's still going to stick out. Yes, we're not, you know, going to make it disappear, but I think that from a concept standpoint, there's probably a lot that could be done that would help lessen the shocking impact that's there, and then certainly taking into the surroundings and the backdrop. For example, I think Sarah mentioned if we were in the south end of the city, we already have really tall power poles that if you were to put a cell tower down there, it's going to disappear a little bit somewhat with the power poles behind it. And so we need to consider, you know, the environment around it, and, you know, maybe we don't put, you know, camouflage trees all over the city, but in cases where, you know, a tree design would work well, we should consider it. You know, in cases where having it look more like the power poles that are already running through the city, that might also work well, or camouflaging it and hiding it on a light post or something like that at a sports complex or something.
So if the pole goes in a school, does the applicant have to work with the school district, or, I mean, that's not something out of...
They would work with the school district to lease, but it's not essential to the school's functioning. So we would, like the bus yard, we would trigger and say, no, you do have to work with us. So, but for example, if they were looking right near the high school, I'd say slap one on the high school football lights, because that's going to be less intrusive than anything else. And so I just think that the coverage map is also really critical for us to consider, because do we want a whole bunch of short things, or do we allow a few tall ones that really give us the coverage we need? We're a growing city. We're going to be 120,000 people. That's, what, 400,000 cell phones or something like that. That's 500,000 cell phones in our city, or more, depending on how it continues to proliferate. But, you know, technology will change, but some of them are fairly good designs. We're not looking for palm trees across the city, but, you know, let's take it, let's own it, let's have fun with it, and let's see if we can do something that's maybe a little bit more creative than just blah.
I'll run through this tree slideshow I found on. It's true. If that was shorter, you wouldn't notice it. You know, when you're in a bunch of trees, palm trees. So there is effort being put into it, but it's a question. It might be an opinion on whether it's making it stand out more or.
So Sarah,
Is that
before we go on, guys, do we need to reopen the public comment, or do we close that last
You
time?
left it open last time, so you do need to open it.
So I would like to open that up before we go on and move it on to the planning commission. So we'll open up public comment again for item number 5, legislative recommendation for proposed code amendments to Title 19. Okay, given that we don't have any comments from the public, do we? Yes, it does. Please come forward if you have. And what's your name and address for the record?
It's Rock Schucher. I live in Holiday, Utah, 2590 East Olympus Drive. A couple of points of clarification. By the way, let me just say, individually and collectively, thank you for your service. You guys are what makes America go. Thank you very much. On this propagation map, they are located at the 2 elementary schools, and what Sprint did is looked at the length of Saratoga and said, let's look at 2 sites, somewhat equidistant, and cover the city. And right now, that can be done from the school district, from those 2 locations. The right-hand propagation map is the 100-foot tower, and as you can see, it really blasts the area. But there's 2 issues. One is the more towers or shorter towers. So in most districts, and I don't think the code really speaks so much about co-location in Saratoga, most jurisdictions really address that. And so if you build a tower, they want at least 3 carriers on the tower. To do that, you need a higher tower. If any carrier was willing to locate on a 40-foot tower in Saratoga, there would never be a second carrier. And the 40-foot is a problem because the topography is so up and down from the west to the lake. So it's a unique topographical problem. So these 2 school locations work out really well. In the past, some districts have said, come and lease from us, you can build what you want, and that's the end of the story. We don't talk to the jurisdiction. And some districts feel they have that state authority to do that. This district wants to work with Saratoga. They want to be a good neighbor. And of course, Sprint and all carriers want to be good neighbors. They want to make it work for everyone. But I have spent 3 months going back and forth in Saratoga talking to a number of private and public landowners. Many of them have been approached several times by cell tower companies. No leases have occurred. It's so complicated. The topography, the height limitation, and those sorts of things. Plus, it's kind of zoned out, except for some very few areas. Obviously, 100-foot gets a lot of things done. 100-foot would get 3 carriers in each of those locations. Wouldn't see 3 or 4 more towers for each 100-foot tower, which probably can't happen anyway. But carriers, when I go into an area jurisdiction, I always approach the city or whoever the jurisdiction is first. Love to work with you. You view the proceeds from the lease. Quite often that works very good. I've talked to Sarah about property out by the water reservoir. I mean, if that could work, that would be a solution too. So there are a variety of ways to work things out, but it is a very difficult city to cell towers in and get coverage.
I have, okay, for that comment, is that because of our geography or because of our code?
Both.
Okay. Secondly, we're recommending a code change where in our regional commercial, is it called that? What's it called? The RC zone. Our RC zone, we're recommending a height increase to 60 feet. Is that a happy medium? Is 60 feet? Or does that not do anything unless it's 100?
Great for the first carrier in some locations, but I don't know where that is. That's on the north end of town, I presume.
Right, the commercial zone is the north end of town. There are some commercial zones here, but they're against the road, so then you're...
If you want to cover homes where people can have telephone conversations in their home without losing a call, there aren't any places zoned that are really convenient. So it is a problem with the code and with the topography. It's a tough combination.
Thank you.
Thank you
very
for your time.
much.
We have another comment?
Yes, Ken Evans. It almost sounds like the city is getting into the cell tower business. I know a little bit about cell towers because of the one that's being proposed adjacent to my property. 100 foot, the taller the cell tower, the more profitable it is for the cell company, the wireless companies. They can not only lease out their excess capacity and have multiple companies on there, they can add all kinds of communication devices on them. If you've seen the 100-foot towers, they are their most profitable. Actually, higher than 100 foot is even more so. They can accomplish what they need to with lower than 100-foot towers. They don't have to be that tall. They don't have to be obnoxious, which a 100-foot tower plus is. But they aren't as profitable. They do require more towers. It is possible to do the connectivity. And I dispute some of the things that I've been hearing because of that. It's convenient, it's more profitable, and it's easier. And on city property, it probably would generate more lease income to the city. People moved into this community to have it look, because of aesthetics, because of the way that it looks, the way that it's developed. There was open space. There's still open space. And a 100-foot tower plus detracts from that. They are noticeable. You can't camouflage them. My piece.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Any other public comment about item number 5? Okay, we will close public comment again, and we'll open this to the Planning Commission. Commissioner Steele.
This will, now, we are considering a lot of changes in this, and so bear with me because I have several comments. I would ask everybody to remember that we're not just talking about cell towers when we are talking about public utilities. The definition that is given is pretty specific on the types of things we have to think about. I would remind staff that we talked about removing the roof-mounted antennas can only be mounted on structures with flat roofs, and that is still in there. Or if you don't want to remove it, we can put residential, non-residential.
I'll strike it right now, Lily.
It's supplementary and it's roof-mounted antennas. It's number 2, and it's subsection A.
Oh, up here, okay,
I've got a little problem of how this is written. On the freestanding antenna and towers, number 3, since monopole towers in the right-of-way are prohibited, I don't think we need to have a separate section for that. I think there should be, you've got B, monopole towers, and then it should be little letter I for monopoles are not permitted within a public right-of-way, and then go from there. I don't think we need a section saying that it's...
Sorry, so our legal counsel has advised that because they're considered a public utility, that we can't necessarily prohibit them from being a public utility right-of-way.
If I could also, Sarah, does this not also refer to, there are some carriers and companies that are putting some technology on light poles, city light poles as well?
So towers, okay, it should say antenna within the right-of-way. We can prohibit the monopole, the giant pole, from being in the right-of-way. So this, if it said antenna,
then that makes sense.
Within the right-of-way, and then it would say monopoles are not permitted, and antenna can be located on top of existing light poles or power poles. Okay, I see.
Okay. Next page, under where we have the heights, I think the reason that the regional commercial went to 60 feet is because of the height limit on regional commercial is 50 feet. And so that gives the pole, the top of the pole, higher than the regional commercial. So I can see that. I questioned it too, and then I looked it up.
I don't have an issue with that. I just wonder that that actually helps cell companies. If it doesn't, then I guess it's just to clarify the code, I guess.
I have a problem with XX3I. Public and private utility sites within any zone, 100 feet. That needs to be reworded or struck, because if that's in any zone, then it can go in any zone. And so if it's not necessary to have that, let's strike it or let's reword it.
It'd be good to get everyone's feedback on that, or if we want it to be a lower height or things like that.
Right. Okay. But I think the any zone, if I see what you're trying to do, but if it's in any zone, then it's in any zone. Okay, and this is one for the Planning Commission to consider. The maximum height for towers within 200 feet of residential development as measured from the property line at the time of tower construction shall be 40 feet. And you've got it existing. And I'm not sure how to word it, but I feel that it should be zoning, because we actually probably, if we allow it, if you've got a vacant piece of land and we allow a 100-foot tower, then it has the probability of decreasing property value for the neighboring property. Okay.
Why don't we put development and or zoning?
Okay. I buy that. Okay, moving on to landscaping and parking areas. Within regional parks, this requirement may be met through the use of intermittent planter beds rather than a berm, hedge, or wall. Trees and shrubs may be clustered in the planter beds. The whole purpose of this is to protect traffic from car lights in the parking lot when they pull in and pull out. And if you do intermittent, that's it's like driving down the road in a wooded area, and every so often you'll get a flashlight, and it really is distracting. And we're also, we have to keep in mind, we're not just doing it for the sports complex, we're doing it for any regional park. And so, what is the problem with doing a berm?
Well, so part of our thought, this requirement is great for our commercial districts where cars are possibly coming in and out 24/7. Part of our thought behind it with parks is that they won't have that level of traffic, except the sports complex could, you know, but outside of baseball season, they won't necessarily have cars coming and going in the dark. So that was part of it. And then Mark, do you have comment on
so
the berm?
I mean, we've got, you know, this is almost kind of the environmental design conversation for police to monitor the park. It's probably better to have it much more open and much more visible. This area in particular, because of the power line corridor, we have such a large setback anyway. We're already quite a ways off of the street, and frankly, we've got baseball lights in this area, so it's going to be pretty well lit anyway. There's a lot of reasons for it, but also just the site design, the site layout. It's a complex issue. It's one of those ones though that has frankly just a question mark in our minds as to, you know, is this really the right thing for us to be doing? Baseball season, we're talking about limited times, so it's not necessarily going to be a 365 days a year kind of a issue.
I will remind you that we're not talking about just the sports complex. We are talking about any regional park that would come in.
Right. So, for example, Neptune Park doesn't have berms around it in that way.
It does, but it's not. Is it 20 acres?
It's a little bit smaller than that. Shea Park does not have berms around it. I mean,
is that 20 acres?
Oh.
No, we don't have any 20-acre parks so far.
That's what I thought.
Those are 10 and 11 acres.
Well, but we could look at Inlet Park, which is a county park, and it doesn't have berming on it either. Again, there's a lot of reasons that we'd consider this.
Okay. As I say, I'm concerned that we are making all these changes to the code for one specific park, and I think we make a grave error if we do that. And I understand the looking at for the police being able to look in, but they can look over a 3-foot berm, and that's what it would take to block car lights. That's what we require everywhere. And so I'll just throw that one out for the Planning Commission to chew on.
But we could reduce it. We could make this for all parks, not just regional parks. If we're focusing on safety and being able to drive by and see what's happening in the parking lot and in the park, and increasing visibility from the street view for safety purposes.
Well,
in this particular location, this would mean that there would need to be a berm under the power line, and that decreases the height of the trees. So right now, the maximum we can put under the power lines is the 12 feet. If you have a 3-foot berm, then that obviously means even smaller than 12 feet.
We're pushing shrubs there, basically.
Yeah, and I understand that, but I'm still thinking about the future, and with other parks coming in, and I think we make a mistake if we don't require the berm. Now, you don't have to put a tree on the berm. You can put low-growing vines, vegetation of some sort, but you need to protect from car lights. If you've ever had a house that is perpendicular to a street, the car lights are a problem. And we've had that in another area of the city. And I really think we need to think about shielding car lights. Yes, it's for the one park that's before us now, maybe it wouldn't be as bad. But we don't know if another park will come in, and we're making this for any regional park.
I can
Enough
assure
said.
you more parks will come in. But fundamentally, I guess the question, we're already not doing this with schools because we can't force them to do it. We're already doing this around churches. I mean, the Tanner Building Church doesn't have a 3-foot berm facing Redwood Road.
I think we have required it, haven't we, Sarah?
I don't believe that's there. I mean, the point that I'm going for though is this really that sacred of an item? And if that's the Planning Commission's feelings, then by all means make that recommendation. I think that there are instances where this just may not apply.
But I'm going to keep saying, we're not talking about just one. We're talking about others. And so we have to think not just for the sports complex, but for in the future. I'll keep going.
We have introduced code, though, that allows for certain other options, so maybe it applies to this park, or maybe it doesn't apply to others. We can write code that is specific to the different.
Okay.
That way Mark's
Yeah,
happy.
we did have that in mind when we drafted this, that it would apply to other regional parks. In the future, we'll have a park in Fox Hollow, and we hope to have additional sports complexes. So we did write this to future parks as well. If it's a concern, other things might be preferable over the berm, such as a hedge or plants.
Yes, anything to block the car lights, because those parks will be going into areas where there are homes, and it would be quite obtrusive.
Commissioner Still, can I just chime in because, you mind? Okay.
I don't mind at all.
If you'd like, so there's different ways we could do it. You could discuss each item, or you could each give your comments individually on everything. So however you prefer to organize the discussion.
Well, I just thought instead of having the conversation go on since it's right on the topic. So I completely agree that we need to be aware that this is for all regional parks, but something that I'm considering in my mind is what makes the 20-acre park that much different than a 10-acre park? It's bigger. I mean, this is a sports complex, so the cars may be concentrated, but you see parks like the new Bluffdale Park where there's parking lots all over the place, and so the concentration of cars isn't necessarily that much different than a 10-acre park or an 11-acre park. And I'm thinking of Shea Park because I drive by it every single day, but there's some natural grass and some like skinny trees, and that's about it. And it doesn't seem to be a problem.
Okay, but in our smaller parks, as a general rule, the parking is on the perimeter, and the car lights are facing into the park.
Till they leave.
And well, then they're backing out onto a street.
Well, a parking lot, and they're driving out of the parking lot, so the exits are still facing houses.
That tends to be a problem, and we've had people complain about when we were planning subdivision. If there are people already there, they don't want that crossroad, and so.
And I completely understand that. As a homeowner, I wouldn't want the light shining into my house, but I also don't think fundamentally that an 11-acre park is necessarily that much different than a 20-acre park. It's bigger, larger land size, but that doesn't necessarily mean the parking is that much different.
Oh, the parking, the way I remember the park is that the parking is interior.
So
It's
the
not on.
sports complex or all regional parks?
Well, we have to assume that other regional parks will have interior parking. That's pretty common with regional parks. Now, with smaller parks, it isn't. So, I don't know. You all can think about it and do whatever. It says on the required trees. I would like to add, because this applies to everything, and it should be all required trees shall be placed outside of the area of power transmission. Otherwise, we'll have somebody come in and say, go right along the power lines and say, I put in all the trees and they're only going to be 10 feet high. So we want to make sure we handle that, and so if we require the required trees to be outside of the transmission lines, then they can come in and they can put in decorative trees, but not the required trees. Does that make sense to everybody? You understand what I'm saying? Okay.
I think the reason that it's in here, in this, yeah, okay, it's fine. What you're saying is fine.
Okay. And C, that was A, and then there's B, and then C is turf. And no landscaping shall be composed, and it probably would be better to say comprised, of more than 70% turf, except within manicured parks. And we don't have a definition for manicured. I wonder if the better term would be improved parks. Because manicured, it means different things to different people. And improved kind of covers a little bit more. I'll respond.
My track change.
Oh. That's something that they may not agree with me. That's just one of the things I'm bringing up.
Well, we have, I thought we had a definition for improved.
We don't even have one for that. I looked it up.
Oh.
Now, it could be somewhere within the document that's not within the definitions.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's not in any of the amended stuff, that's for sure. I just thought in the past, because it was talking about trails. And there are, various types of trails, and some have improvements done. Oh, where was it? Isn't there? Is there a
We have, under our open space section, we have defined different types of open space. Defined improved open space, unimproved.
That's what it was.
That
Okay.
kind of thing. So it doesn't relate to parks.
That's why I was a little worried that if we used improved, it could be confusing because there is a definition already, which I thought included weeds and stuff.
I could just take out the word manicured so that it says,
I mean, maybe just landscaped.
yeah, within the park.
Because I thought the same thing about manicured, and I thought landscape would be better. Yeah.
And I could add landscaping, or I could just say, no landscaping shall be comprised of more than 10 kept within park.
Okay. Going onward, non-residential lighting. And that's under chapter 1911. And 3C, I, regional parks may include theme lighting in colors other than black. I think a better term might be include theme lighting fixtures other than black.
I think we're fine with whatever tweaks. The council has a light pole that looks like a baseball bat, and for this park, they want to go with that theme. Neptune Park, they went with a different theme. So however you guys wordsmith it, that's fine for us. We just want to be able to put theme lighting. The council, as kind of their top priority, they really want to make our parks spectacular. And so what they're trying to accomplish will include theme lighting and other things, and we just felt like we need to be able to have some flexibility to do that.
And I understand that, but the way that is, the lighting is black, and it should be lighting fixtures.
Or are you talking about black light?
Oh, no.
Like for Halloween?
I added the word fixture so it's
Okay.
consistent with the language above, and I think that works well.
And F, the same thing, theme lighting fixtures. That does not include an arm and bell shade. Okay, and walkway lighting, number 6, and it would be BI. Is the themed lighting going to be on the interior of, well, and here again, we're talking about all parks, but we make churches put their lights in at 16 feet because if they're within 200 feet of a residence. And here we're talking about walkway lighting at 25 feet. If it's interior, I can see that. If it's going to be a walkway around the park, then that would be a problem because we're two different standards.
Again, I'm just pointing back to Neptune Park. That's what we have in Neptune Park.
But this came
On
after.
on the street, we have, I believe, the city street standards, and then interior is what that is. I mean, you know, realistically, I understand what you're saying. We're not looking to proliferate our lights elsewhere, but interior to the park, we feel like this is an important option for us to be able to meet the design that the council's going for.
I would like this put in the minutes so they'll know that it was at least brought up.
Sure.
That there's, you know, a discrepancy between what we're requiring of churches and all development that's non-residential. You can't be within 200 feet of a residence or residentially zoned with anything higher than 16 feet. And I'm wondering if 16 feet wouldn't achieve what you're trying to achieve with themed lighting.
The ones we're talking about in this particular situation, and I know that this isn't, I know that we can't look at just this situation, but the ones we're talking about for the sports park are the main walkways leading up to the center of the park. However, I understand what you're saying. So if we had a lower height for walkway lighting within 200 feet of residential, it wouldn't affect this park.
Very good.
So the one thing that I think is kind of interesting with this park, we're trying to get it built so that when the other neighborhoods build, they know that there's lights around the ball fields. They know what they're moving in next to, the berms, the different questions, those things. We're trying to resolve all those issues so that when they start pulling permits in Legacy Farms across the street, they can see what they're going next to, and they're buying with full knowledge of the existing condition. And so I would anticipate if we're doing big parks like this, you know, we're going to try and get out ahead of it. The exception would be Fox Hollow, and that's just because there's so many complexities with the earth moving off of that one. As far as the two that are on the books, that one's going to be a tough one, because even that one, and thinking about the berm discussion, we're going to have parking up above. What we're trying to do is make it work with a slope here, but according to what we've talked about with requiring the berm next to the parking lot, we're going to require berms on the hillside that we're trying to reduce. And so that's the kind of flexibility we're asking for, is to be able to design it in a way that it makes the most sense. So in this case, the lighting you know, is kind of a critical element to that theme. We probably anticipate that we're going to need taller lighting near the amphitheater and the Fox Hollow Park, and just those two parks alone, we kind of anticipate that we're going to need to have that flexibility.
Well, my opinion is, if you're going to put the parking above, that is when you need the berm or a hedge. You could do a hedge. I mean, that's doable.
But again, we're talking about lights shining out over the lake. We're way above anyone's homes. So it's a unique scenario and a different status for us to be looking at, because again, we're trying to get the sidewalk just out of the curb and gutter, and then we're going to be heading down the hill.
Also, I'd like to make a comment too, that I think what Commissioner Steele is doing is really good, because I think, especially early on with the city, in order to catch up with development and such, code was written specifically for certain developers maybe, or certain cases. I'm not saying that we wrote it for developers, but certain cases. And because of that, Kimber had just, you know, spent her entire time here working on code and cleaning it up and making it more consistent and everything. So, I mean, if there is like I don't have the historical knowledge or remember that the churches are required 16 feet while we're allowing 20 because we're building a park really fast. Yeah, and so I think it is good to at least bring it up so that we remind ourselves that we have this code in place and that we require other applicants to follow, that we shouldn't just be willy-nilly writing code just so that we could get this park in. And for things like berms, yeah, let's discuss it. Maybe the code is too restrictive, but I think what you're doing is a good thing.
Thank you. I don't have too many more pages here. Again, the site design and the parking lots adjacent to and visible from public streets shall be screened from view through the use of berms, screen walls, landscape, hedges, or combinations thereof, with a minimum height of 3 feet as measured from the parking surface. Within regional parks, this requirement may be met through intermittent planter beds rather than a berm, hedge, or wall. Same thing, just need to discuss it. Okay, now we get to the revised or the new code for public utility buildings. And when I'm expressing my concern, I'd like to have everybody go back and be looking at what we actually are, what public utility building or facility, the definition that has been given, and then what we've got in here. C, a minimum of 5-foot setback from all property lines shall be maintained for any utility structure. What do you define utility structure? How do you define that? One question. I've had a guest last weekend, and we did a lot of sightseeing around our city and around others. And we have said that we don't want chain link. And we kind of talked about dark vinyl coated chain link. But when I was looking, some of the other cities have the wrought iron with a curve outward. And that does the same thing as it. Let's face it, a chain link with barbed wire, throw a coat over it and they can be over it in about 3 seconds. I've watched kids go over a 10-foot chain link. So for the look of our city, and that's the reason we had put in no chain link except in agricultural, I think we still can say no chain link. And to allow barbed wire, that's not what we want our city to look like, I don't think. So I have concerns about that, and so if you do the wrought iron with the curve, outward curve, it's not impossible. Nothing's impossible to go over, but that would make it difficult. If you decide to keep the chain link in, then it says barbed wire may be used in conjunction with a chain link fence if warranted because of a legitimate security concern. Again, how do we define legitimate? And thinking the opposite way, what would be illegitimate? So I think that word probably needs to be changed. And on that one, my personal opinion is we ought to, if there is a building, that it not be flat roofed. I've seen some in other cities and they look like dog houses. And so a pitched roof does help a little bit. I think I only have, guess what? I'm through.
Thank you, Commissioner Steele. Others?
I have,
I have some. Okay, first of all, I do want to say that I agree with Commissioner Steele on almost everything she said, just so she knows and the rest of the commissioners know my feelings on that. One of the things that was talked about was, that we've talked about in the past, was viewpoints, and the fact that we can't do a whole lot to regulate viewpoints. But this is actually, by looking at these towers, this is one way we can do some things. We can make some decisions on that. I was recently down in Texas and Louisiana, more flat land, and saw some of the towers around there. Some of them were good. I will say that one that bothered me more than any others was that there was a 100-foot pole, and maybe 100 feet away was a 40-foot pole, and it just looked so strange having a tall pole and a short pole so close together. I have a little concern also on the flag regulations that we had here. I mean, I'm not familiar enough with how big of flags are really acceptable or not acceptable, but I know that in other places here in Utah, we have some car dealers and some grocery stores, I won't name any of them, that have large flags on large flagpoles, and I actually like that. I don't have a big problem with that. And if you want to throw a cell tower on the top of it, I could actually even go with that. I do think that I do think that one of the things that we can do as far as cell towers go is definitely look at what towers we currently have as far as lighting poles, sports complex poles, even like the football field at the high school, things like that, and try to utilize what already exists. I originally am a flatlander, so I'm used to where you can put up a tower. I mean, it does stick out like a sore thumb, but you put up a tower and it covers everywhere because the land's so level. And I realize here with the mountains, we have a big problem with that. I have a concern or a question as to why we can't put some of these towers up on some of the mountains and get more coverage that way. I realize the problem you have is if you put it up next to a mountain, you're only going to cover half as much. You're not going to be covering 100 or 360 degrees. You're only covering away from the mountain. But where our city is located, you know, most of the people are located in lower lands. I would think if you put them up on the mountain, you're going to cover the city rather than, you know, cover the mountain. And I could see in the examples that we had that the one tower, it was actually the shorter one, the shorter tower, when you put it in, it covered the lake great because the lake is a level land and it was up higher than that. So I mean, I don't know on towers. I mean, I realize that if you can cover 360 degrees, that's definitely, you're getting more for, you're more bang for your buck. And I don't know if we can have him respond or not, but.
You can ask questions of him.
Okay. Can you come and respond to some of those questions? Just cause I don't know, you know, I don't build towers, so I don't know, but.
It's a common question, comes up a lot, doesn't work.
You just state your name just for the record.
From the top of the mountain.
Go ahead and
sir,
state your
could
name
you
again.
state your name for the record?
Future, Holiday, Utah. There's another third unique problem about Saratoga, and that is the lake. The lake reflects the RF signal, so they have to have a tighter control over that signal. So I'm going to say, you asked another question.
So can you put them up on mountains and cover an area, or?
No, you can't. You have some up there right now, right?
Yeah.
What do they call that? Com road that goes up there, and there's a couple of things up there, but it can't cover this legitimately. One of the things that comes into play, you have each location has a certain capacity to handle so many phone calls. Okay, so you have a number of radios, a number of antennas, and there's a physical limit to how much traffic you can handle. So that dictates a closer spectrum. And let me just say that all of this technology starts with an RF engineer. So the RF engineer says, we're dropping holes in Saratoga, we're dropping calls in Saratoga City. There's a hole for coverage. We need to fill that coverage. Well, how do we do it? And so they tell us where the best locations are. Now, because the train goes like this, if you put a 100-foot tower here, you can cover everything below, but the next 100 foot,
right,
you can't get above it. Okay, so very unique problems here. It's solvable, but mention some other scenarios. I have personally built sites in 8 western states, including Hawaii, hundreds of sites. I've seen one tree. We put up one tree in Hawaii that was an acceptable tree. I also live in California part-time. Palm trees are the best tree to actually work for cell sites. They're the most physically accepting of antennas. Flagpoles, imitation flagpoles work good because you can put antennas inside flagpoles, but that means the flagpole is this big around. So there are some issues about that. One of the best things you can do is what we call flush mount. So you have the tower and you have the antennas flush mounted close to the tower instead of arms that hang out. And so that's the least obtrusive that you can do. And there is a little bit of a limitation, but you can be, 48 inches around instead of 10 feet around. So there's some answers, but let me just say something. You're working on all of these issues. I would love to volunteer my time to a work group, Sarah's group, or any other group, but you need outside consulting to solve some of these problems. You really need to understand the problems because, great question, can't we put it up there? No, you can't. But I would love to answer questions to a work group, flush out some issues, flush out some potential answers, solutions. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Thank you, Ron.
Appreciate your answer on that. And I think that pretty much, other than what was already brought up, that's pretty much all I have.
Commissioner Kilgore.
There was on page 36 of the large staff pack, but about standard chain links and vinyl coated, and the packet invited discussion, and I think Commissioner Steele started it. I agree with Commissioner Steele. I think chain link. I don't think it's really an issue of people being able to climb over them. I think they, like Commissioner Steele said, they could do that with any fence if they really want to. So I think it's really an aesthetic issue. And if we realize it's an aesthetic issue, then I think chain link fence looks weird in a city where we're already trying to get away from that kind of thing. And in particular, the cell tower area, where if we allow chain link fence, I mean, right next to it is that, what is that? Pump station. Or is it Questar? It's the Questar gas station. Yeah. So the Questar thing, that they have a rock wall all around it, and then right next to it's going to be a chain link fence, and it just doesn't make sense. Why do we require a rock wall from Questar, and then AT&T, a billion-dollar company, we're allowing a chain link fence? It just seems weird. Although that's not the issue, but it just doesn't look aesthetically right, especially in that location. I could understand agriculture, all that, but I mean, this is one of the key or main centers of our city. So that's my issue with that. And on the same page, paragraph 4 talks about feathering. I just wonder if, and it also invites some discussion about that. I just wonder if, I never actually liked the word feathering, and the reason why is because feathering means this, where you interleaf, basically we're talking different zones. And it's, how do you do that? How do you interleaf different zones? I think it's better just to approach it from an idea of transitioning, or maybe like graduated, where you have two or three distinct zones, because that's the way we could zone it. But there's really no way you could actually, I don't think, or maybe we don't want to get into anything that complicated, where you can feather, basically interleaf different zones.
In here.
The gradient.
Where's the
Yeah.
What section was that?
So it was page 36 of the big staff packet. Again, it's up for discussion, but I think the concept is right. It's just that for paragraph, actually right. But the first page. It's the second page of that packet, under paragraph 4 at the top. Talk about feathering. Says staff would like the planning commission to discuss this further and provide feedback on suggested feathering. Oh. So my feeling on it is that feathering is the right concept and not the right word, because again, it requires interlacing. That's what feathering means. Whereas I think the idea of maybe a transition or graded, that makes more sense, because then you can actually zone it that way rather than have it interlaced. So that's my comment on that. There's some page 52. The prohibited fencing. So it's 19.06.09. Very next page. There's paragraph 4, prohibited fencing. There's an and between 1 and 2, but not before 3. Then an or for number 4. But yeah, okay, I can see that. See under paragraph 4A, you've got in parentheses 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Might not be in the right spot. So is it 1906?
It's 19.06.09. Screening and fencing requirements and restrictions.
It's one of the yeah.
Yeah. And then
Oh, okay, right
yeah,
here.
Yeah, and then on 4A, you've got the parentheses 1, 2, 3, and 4. So in 1 and 2, you've got and. In other words, this does not apply to chain link or wire fences if the fence 1 is not being used to delineate lot boundaries, and 2 is being used for agriculture uses or otherwise for the keeping of animals. Then you have no and. 3 does not occupy more than 50% of any residential yard, and then or 4 is for backstops, sports fields, or blah, blah, blah. So is that really what you want to do? Is that it requires first 2 requirements, the third one maybe not, and then or as another one. So where does this actually apply?
That's a good point. We might want to keep this and. Or
That means they're all.
then they have to meet all three.
All three.
Or they can be backstops or sports fields.
Yeah. That makes better sense. Okay, next is chapter 19.16, the page before that, all the red text. Yeah. D and E, they kind of repeat. So you've got, in the middle of D, it says, notwithstanding fencing requirements contained in chapter 19.06, blah, blah, blah. Then you've got that again in E, notwithstanding fencing requirements contained in chapter 19.06. Same thing, you're talking about barbed wire fencing shall be permitted. In other words, I don't think you need E.
Okay. And if we're not allowing, or if the planning commission decides that they are not going to allow chain link with barbed wire, then that one needs to be struck, but that's up to.
Yeah.
If I could, the chain link fence that we're looking for is I mean, we're not necessarily looking to use that at the cell tower site. We're looking at like an Israel Canyon pond or a pond up on the top of the hill in Mount Saratoga, or Zone 5 pond that's going to be so far up the hill. There's some important reasons why we would ask for something like that. Israel Canyon pond, if we continue down the path of this wrought iron pond, we're talking about probably $250,000 to $500,000 to replace the fence at Israel Canyon. And the irony is we talk about fiscal sustainability all over the place. We talk about how we need to be responsible with taxpayer dollars, and yet we're proposing fence that is $80 a foot compared to chain link, which is $20 a foot. And so, you know, we don't like vinyl, we don't like a lot of things, but from a fiscal sustainability standpoint, I've got probably a $250,000 project to replace wrought iron along Redwood Road in the Stillwater area, because we demanded it and it happens to be on our side of the property line. And so now I've got to come up with $250,000 to replace a fence that is aesthetically beautiful. And I think we would all agree to that. I'm not asking to replace that with chain link, but I think the most expensive fence that's there, it should have more life. And unfortunately, we're looking at about a 10 to a 15-year replacement cycle on this wrought iron fence. It's not fiscally sustainable. And so fundamentally, I think we need to ask the question from a taxpayer standpoint, is it the right decision for us to make to require this extremely expensive product, although it looks fantastic in all scenarios? We spent an additional $150,000 to put wrought iron fence around the pond up at the top at Harvest Hills when it was originally built with chain link fence. That was the up cost to do that. And the council was obligated to do that because they did not have another alternative to do that. And we're asking the question from a fiscal sustainability standpoint, is that really what we want? If you would like, we can certainly add the cost of this fencing into our utility rates, but then people complain about the high cost of utility rates. We can do it in a form of a property tax increase, but you know how popular that's going to be. Fundamentally, right now, we have revenues because we have a lot of growth activities, and so we're kind of cushioned and insulated. But if the true cost of these types of improvements all came back down on us, we're going to have to raise rates. I'm not saying that to be a doomsdayer. I'm saying from a fiscal sustainability standpoint, we're going to have an ongoing revenue stream to cover the maintenance costs on these types of things. And so please understand, we're asking for this not because we want to ignore the code, not because we want it to look bad, but for example, the pond at the top of Evans Lane. We're building in an area where no one is currently at. You've got a few agriculture uses in the area. If we put chain link fence around this site, which would be substantially cheaper, as opposed to hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of wrought iron fence, it will be there before the neighbors will be there. It's cheaper, it will have a much, much longer life, and it serves its purpose. If we did the vinyl coating, it would look better than, say, the normal gray chain link fence. We're asking for that kind of flexibility so that we can be responsible with taxpayer dollars. It's not the most beautiful thing, but building a rock wall around something, there you're getting even more expensive. You're $100 a foot on that. Is that really the right decision for us to make from an aesthetically pleasing concept? And yes, we are different than commercial. That's typically the argument that gets thrown back in our face. We are not for profit. We are doing this as inexpensively as we can, as high of a quality as we can, trying to be fiscally responsible for those people that we tax. They don't get a choice. Walmart, commercial businesses, they have a choice. They're making a profit. They are making money, and so you can have a different set of standards for that. And so I'd ask you to be mindful of that. We're not looking to disregard code. We're not looking to get an advantage above everyone else. The ponds that we're building serve everybody. And if we're going to do this, we need to consider the fiscal impacts of what these kinds of decisions make.
Are you going to put chain or barbed wire on top of it, or razor wire?
We might. We had a kid swimming in the pond off of 400 North because the fence wasn't keeping him out.
No, so I totally agree with all that, except my understanding was that this code change was being put in so that we can put chain link fence around the cell tower to allow that, and it's a utility.
Perhaps
so
we could split up the different utilities. This is
Yeah,
a belief
exactly.
code that covers all the utilities. Perhaps we can split them for the different uses. For example,
Or I think-
just let me finish. The cell towers, for example, the number one cause of a cell tower going down is an automobile hitting it. So a chain link fence isn't really going to prevent that. So potentially something
Certainly
that's
vinyl
stronger.
won't either.
Right.
And wrought iron won't either, because
Right.
those get tipped over by kids just pushing on the
Right, so I suggested the rock wall only because the Quest Star station right next to it is rock, and we required that of them, and like I said before, it's the location. I mean, if it were somewhere else, yeah, fine, but it happens to be right in the center of our city, you know, and I don't know, I think if we could somehow split it out, that would be great, because I do worry about the fiscal impacts, but again, I understood that we're making a code change to help facilitate putting a chain link fence around this cell tower. That was my understanding. If I'm wrong, then...
Well, I think we could, rather than split this out as far as, I say we do something along the lines of distance from nearest residence or something like that, right? Because to his point, who cares what some retention pond has that's up, miles from people or that no one's living around at the time, right? Versus something like, the cell tower over there that people are going to be living there close by. And so I think if we added some requirements in here saying, within so many feet of existing residential or business or zoning home. Well, a lot of our stuff's already zoned, even if there's no one living anywhere nearby. And if someone, if there's no one living there and then they bring in a concept plan, people know what they're getting into, so we're not dropping something right in their backyard that they weren't planning on. They're making that decision on that they want to live there with the existing situation. And so I say we can do so far from existing residences or business and probably be fine. And then residences move in close to a place that's got chain link. Well, when that chain link needs to be replaced, well, now they're no longer so far from that, and so now we have to put wrought iron or a nicer fence to comply with code. And so it kind of becomes this.
Or they become grandfathered in.
But why would we have to replace it? Because
Well, no. I just say when the fence comes up, if you got to replace the fence at some point in the future because it needs to be replaced,
That's not
then
how
all
it
of a sudden
works,
then all of a sudden you're now within so many feet of a residential, so at that point we'd have to comply with code.
we
No,
wouldn't.
they could replace exactly what they had because it passed at the time.
And that's fundamentally the question. Wrought iron fence is extremely expensive because it's not wrought iron. It's aluminum coated and it's painted. And we're finding that in the
breaks.
corners near where you attach it to the brick or whatever post you're using, it's rotting out. It's just rotting out. And so, what we're contemplating is if the chain link fence is there when they come in, that's an existing condition. No different than if someone moves in next to a mink farm or a pig farm or something like that. That's the condition that exists when they get there. And so, again, in some of these cases, we want to get in, we want to get these things done, not to make it look bad. I mean, that's not the intent, but fundamentally, in our very own planning documents and our general plan, we talk about fiscal sustainability. We talk about trying to build a community that is built on good, sound financial principles. And I hate to say it, but we don't have a caviar income to be able to afford a caviar lifestyle. We're more like tuna fish and crackers. So, we're trying to make it look nice. We're trying to do it well, but we're also trying to be responsible because it's ultimately going to come back to every resident's wallet when we start replacing these things.
So I think Mark makes a good point. I mean, we do need to look at how we're going to pay for these things because you have to replace them every so often, and they're not inexpensive. I also think that there are other uses, for example, the cell tower, that may need a different kind of enclosure to protect it against any kind of physical damage.
I don't think
Potentially
we
by a
have to
vehicle.
worry about, I mean, that's the cell phone
Maybe
company
we
that has
do.
to
I'd
worry
still
about that.
But didn't this
I propose that we still split those out.
Is that something you'd like us to work on and bring back to you instead of trying to sit here tonight and design it? We could come up with some standards for various.
Yeah, I mean,
And-
we're all going to talk about code tonight, and so we'll have to come to a decision of whether we want to move this forward or whether we want to come back and see it again. Because
I do have, I got an email from Jeremy, our Public Works Director, and I asked him the difference in cost estimate on an 8-foot chain link fence versus the wrought iron with the curve. And for the pond site that's coming forward for our secondary pond, that is right below Mount Saratoga is the location. It's at the very top of Evans Lane, if you know where that is. And the difference to surround that site is $178,000 for the wrought iron style and $48,000 for the 8-foot chain link. So it's a significant cost difference when you look at it needs 2,100 lineal feet of fencing around that site. And so when you look at just to add data to what Mark Christensen is saying, when you look at the cost, it's significant.
Well, again, and I'm totally okay with that. It's just the cell tower that because of where it is.
Well, I did leave something out with all of my wording. And
back to you, Commissioner Steele.
what I was concerned about is the fencing was one thing, but the 5-foot setback for all of the different uses.
Yeah, I wanted to know what the setback is today, and we're changing it to 5 is what was proposed. What is it today?
It would be on agricultural land, I believe it's 50 feet.
Right, so in every zone it would be front, back, and side, and it's different in every zone. If we're talking about the agriculture zone specifically, the front is 50 feet and the sides are 25 feet.
Okay, so
One size
I've
doesn't
waited
fit
a
all.
long time, and I got to say something. Usually I wait till the very end, but on this one particularly, because it does affect something that's on the docket tonight, and it's for the cell tower. If we reduce that setback to 5 feet so that we can bring this property, we can make that property available for a cell tower. I mean, just Google YouTube. I'm sorry, not Google. Look at YouTube and look at cell tower burning. You'll see them coming down, and they fall, and it's more than 5 feet. I tell you, it's as tall as the thing. The distance is as tall as it is. as far as the fencing, you can also look at YouTube and see a teenager falling from one of them. So we need to be able to keep people out of those as well, because they can climb them and do things that we would not like to see again. So let me just finish this part. So I did a little bit of research on this. So there is a Telecommunications Act of 1996 that says we cannot preclude the approval of a cell tower based upon health. But in the same sentence, you look at the FCC. They have a letter to Richard Blumenthal, November 24th, 2015, from the FCC, where they're concerned about their employees with RF emissions. So they still acknowledge that there is some danger to that. So we can't even talk about that one. But as far as approving a 100-foot tower that next to something that is potentially zoned residential, I just think that's unthinkable to think this tower could burn down. There's high voltage that's going up into these towers. They do catch on fire. They do get hit by vehicles and those fall. I mean, you have a medical facility that's within that radius. You've got homes within that radius. So although it's not based upon health, it is based on safety. And it's not because of the radio emissions, but it's based on the safety of it falling, which is protected by the envelope or the setback. So I would not support decreasing that setback to 5.
For cell towers or for?
For cell towers, specifically.
A telephone switching is something else. You might not need that much. I think they, of the A through F, you need to look at it for fencing and for setbacks.
So splitting it out and looking at each one individually.
Yeah, because one size does not fit all. It would be absurd to require the gas people to have 100 feet.
Right.
Or 50 feet even. They don't need that. But our reservoirs and ponds and whatnot probably need more than 5, especially if there's a dam. They need to be able to get equipment all the way around it. So maybe that needs to be 12. And that's something that it would be nice if Jeremy could.
Well, but for example, the reason that we proposed what we did was, for example, if we have a booster pump, there's no reason why we couldn't set a booster pump, or something small right near a property line, and use that utility easement for that purpose.
That's what we say or are saying.
And so, I think we're all on the same page, but the 5-foot setback gets us what we need in some cases, and that's why we were looking at that. We weren't necessarily looking at a cell tower side yard setback or something, but we were saying, look, in an unobtrusive manner, if we need to put, a small filter station up, it's relatively small, it's relatively unobtrusive, but we need to be able to not have to make these tremendously large things.
Would it work for the city then to split those out and look at them as the city needs them and what's safe for the public? And
if you make that change, we will have Kevin make sure he's good with it by the time it goes to the city council, because he unfortunately isn't here tonight for our meeting. But I think what you're saying makes sense. We were just trying to say utilities, and we were not trying to opt ourselves out only. We were trying to say, if it's Questar Gas, if it's someone that needs that setback, or, I think, those kinds of things, we wanted to make it a little bit more encompassing. If you're not comfortable with it, narrow it down. We'll have Kevin make that determination.
Let me speak in favor of keeping it more along the lines of where we are today. So an alternate point of view. Keeping in mind that these are the setbacks. Keeping in mind that these are utilities. The property that's going to be used is very utilitarian. These setbacks are not maximums, they're minimums. And so in effort to try to keep the code as simple as possible, we can say utilities have a minimum setback of 5 feet. Well, if you are a dam or something like that where you need to get stuff around or whatnot, you're not going to go with the 5 feet, because we've got to be able to serve this, we've got to be able to get equipment in there and whatnot. And if you are Questar and you do a 5 foot and you need to get a truck back there and you didn't think ahead, well, you're an idiot, Questar, and I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to tear down your thing and redo it because now you can't service your stuff. To the same end, when we start talking about things like cars hitting cell towers, those are real concerns. I don't think that any of us are qualified enough to kind of start dictating exactly what fencing needs to go around what utilities. There comes a point where the free market works, and where AT&T and other cell phone companies need to start taking care of and having responsibility in protecting their equipment. Because if someone runs into a cell phone tower and destroys it, it's not the citizens of Saratoga Springs that are on the financial hook for that. It's AT&T that's on the financial hook to replace that. Now, safety's another issue. The concern with that is if we've got a 100-foot cell tower and we're saying, well, we don't want that falling and hitting something, we're now requiring a 100-foot setback in all different directions on that property. I think that is an unnecessary burden to place on any organization. And I don't think any other cities require that. I mean, we don't see 40-foot setbacks around every cell tower in the United States that are 40 foot tall or more.
That goes along with another opinion I have, is that maybe we don't need to do the taller ones. First, they stick out. Second, maybe we do shorter ones that could blend in better at the city. And yeah, maybe we have more of them, but maybe they're shorter. And for 100 feet, I'm not so concerned about burden or financial impacts to organizations, but more to the people that surround it.
Finish the code stuff.
Commissioner Williamson, I wasn't clear. Were you supporting the 5 feet or the ones that are already in the zones, the setbacks?
I'm more in favor of going with a minimum setback requirement, and then letting utility companies, the city or whatnot, determine what is appropriate above and beyond that they may need to service and protect their
Yeah, and in the case of the pond, that's exactly what the city's doing. There's now you probably haven't seen the drawing, but there's a service road all the way around the pond. So the pond itself is probably 20 or 25 feet from the property line itself. And I think those utilities will probably work that out on their own, what they need to get on to service whatever their site is.
So we're also phasing the pond as well. So what you're seeing now is not the final pond size, because we're going to have to, add on to it in the years in the future. Just because of the timing of impact fees and other things, we can't build it for its master plan size. We can only build it a certain size so that it's eligible for funding in a certain funding cycle. Then as growth comes, we'll have to expand it incrementally to be able to make it ultimately fit the site more. So in that case, we will be getting closer to the sides as it continues to expand, and we have to build capacity.
I'd like to finish just one more comment, then I'm done. On the same page is the one that we just struck, where we had that redundant phrase. Under paragraph A, it says that these apply to a public utility. But what about, do we not worry, are there such things as private utilities, like maybe solar companies, solar cell companies and such? And if so, then do we not want these requirements to also apply to them, or are we okay with keeping them separate?
Or you could just identify municipal utilities.
Okay, maybe that makes more sense.
What's the definition of a municipal?
I would say it's a city-owned.
Okay, but we've got a lot of things in here that are not.
That's true. So, I mean, it is a little bit of a sticky wicket because we weren't looking at it that way, but if that's the direction you want to go, then
well, I'm just worried if there are private utilities, then are they exempt from these requirements? And why should they be? I mean, is that something that we've actually thought about? Because with solar power companies coming in, who knows what kind of new utility type of things that they're going to require?
It's a fair point.
Well, if
well, like Vivint, they're putting solar power panels on people's roofs and things like that. They're just feeding it back into the grid, so I don't necessarily see them necessarily building infrastructure that would require some of these types of facilities. But in theory, something like that could take place.
But also, cable companies, don't they build?
Yeah, and they're specifically allowed under state code to be in the public utility easements, and so typically it's their smaller stuff that is in those utility easements, and that's what it's designed for in the first place.
I guess as we're evolving, especially with things like solar, there might be private utilities as well that require some kind of construction and stuff. I mean, why not just include them, or are we just limited to things that we can control, like city stuff?
I would agree, public and private utilities, giving them kind of the same rules to play by.
You know, I would think so. If there are such things, I'm just asking actually the question. If there are such things.
Well, if municipal is city-owned, then what's the definition of a public utility and what's the definition of a private utility? I think that goes, you know, you have to.
That's I guess what I'm asking.
Right, I believe there are certain definitions for each at a state level.
I think we better be looking at them.
Yeah, because I'm just wondering then, do these ordinances apply to private as well?
No, the way this is written, it would apply to a utility that has public utility status. So right now, those would be the cell towers, and then they would be the city utilities, and they would be, of course, gas and power.
Okay.
I don't know if they would be others like I'd have to check and see which ones have public utility status.
What would be the
Gain public utility status.
I'm not sure.
What would be the consequences of taking the word public out and just having utility?
That'd probably be a Kevin question.
That might be something we look into.
Right. When I first drafted it, I had public and private in there, and our city attorney took out private. So
There may be an actual reason.
he had some reason behind it, and he had looked into which ones have public utility status and which ones don't. So he had some reason for taking that out, but
Well, I'm not trying to second guess the attorney. I just want to know if we had actually considered it, but it sounds like we did consider it. And
yeah,
okay.
my
If that's the-
initial draft said public and private, and he took out the and private.
Okay.
And
Then
some reasons for doing that.
then I'm okay with how it stands, because I wanted to bring up private to see if you had considered it. It sounds like you had. Yeah, so that's fine then.
Hey,
The definition then needs to reflect that.
hey Mark, do
Well, the
utility?
definition can state, the definition addresses both. So the definition addresses public and private, but this section only addresses public.
Question?
Do we have any franchise agreements with utilities to operate in the city?
So, so for example, power, we do, gas, we do have franchise agreements with some of the internet folks. We have a franchise, like Avative Fiber, you know, some of the fiber companies that are in our rights of way, things of that nature. We have a franchise agreement with Comcast, with, what's the telephone company's name these days? It's killed because of the cell towers, Quest. Yeah, or Quest, yeah, something else. CenturyLink, yeah, whatever it is. So yeah, we do have a number of franchise agreements, and so if you wanted to limit it to, you know, public utilities and franchisees or something like that, you know, that would be an interesting one. I think of one example though where we may want to consider allowing these types of things for like a Rocky Mountain Power. If you notice their site off of 400 South, it's got chain link around it, and they've got no vegetation within their substation. And the reason for that is safety reasons. And so in that particular instance, and that's why we kind of kept the door open, was in that type of a situation, we would need to let them be exempted from landscaping, and we'd need to let them have chain link, because otherwise it becomes a safety concern for that particular scenario.
Is the cell tower, is that a conditional use, or?
Yes.
Well, if that's the case, then maybe we just go ahead with the chain link fence in utility zones or utilities, and then just handle things like cell tower, those kinds of exceptions through the conditional use process, right?
Right.
Then
it would be.
Then we don't have to create all these little zones, mini zones, and things.
Right. And the way this is drafted says that it gives a whole list of options on fencing. So installation of fencing or walls or type of fencing or walls of use shall be determined at the discretion of the property owner and shall consist of one or more of the following: masonry, wrought iron or equivalent, earth tone or dark vinyl coated chain link or Simtech. And then it has this: notwithstanding the fencing requirements, barbed wire may be used in conjunction with chain link. There's a legitimate security concern. And you do have a valid point that we what legitimate means.
Yeah. Well, so I don't have an issue with the private public. I just want to ask the question whether private was considered, and it sounds like it had been, so I'm actually okay with the way it is, but maybe a follow-on discussion is fine. And then as far as the cell tower, the chain links, the fencing, I'm okay if we could handle it, because my issue happens to be that one tower in that one location. I totally agree with the fiscal issues, with all the other use cases, the security issues and all that stuff. And so it doesn't make sense to create little mini zones if we can handle it through the conditional use process. That's my opinion.
Okay.
I'd like to see us, I'd like to see us continue this so that we could have Jeremy here to talk about setbacks, because to me, the 5-foot setback is, we're trying to make one size fit everything, including parking lots, including storage yards. And so some of those are going to have, they could have a detrimental effect on the neighbors, depending on where they're put. There are some of these, a sewage treatment plant is 5 feet, really enough? Is on a, you and I agree on this, and if you have one of these,
They need to be handled differently, the different uses of utilities.
absolutely, and if you think about the Bluffdale, right outside of Bluffdale, the big transmission station they have there, that probably needs a little more setback than the one on 400, considerably smaller. It may not need quite as much. So we need to think about some of these things. It's going to come up, and it's going to come up next meeting because the pond's on our agenda.
But
And
to that end, if we start trying to think of every scenario for every utility and try to come up with special setback situations for that, our code will be so burdensome. It'll be so difficult in this area. We're again, if this is just minimum, I mean, I don't feel like we have to regulate everything to the nth degree. I think a sewage treatment plant is not going to come in and put their whole treatment plant with 5 foot around on all sides of it.
But they could.
They could.
They could.
Yes, they could.
They could, but
We couldn't stop it, it would be an administrative decision.
So just so you all are aware, we've been talking with the developer on the very far south end of the city. They will need a sewer facility of some sort. So we've had some conceptual conversations, and so I think that's a legitimate concern. So, you know, I would say if you can give enough direction for us and we can craft these changes for the council, that's one thing. If you choose to table it, that's certainly another. But you've got an application that's coming crashing at you, and I will be direct with you. That pond, we've got to get started constructing it as soon as possible. And frankly, we got held up a little bit because we were having this internal debate of how do we treat this, because we can't do certain things that our code requires because it would compromise the safety of the dam. And so, I mean, we've got some of those challenges that are going to be right in front of us.
So sorry, I do want to point out that the code is specific to structures, so it wouldn't necessarily apply unless that's defined as a structure.
That's what I ask, is that we need a definition for a structure. A dam would be a structure, and if this has a dam, that's a structure. So I'll make a proposal and see where everybody is on this. I would propose that we table and we have it heard at the first of the meeting next week when we're hearing the pond, and put the pond second. And because I'd like to see this before it goes to council. And I understand the problem you're facing with the weather. And so maybe we could handle it that way. If we give some specific direction, then Sarah will be burning the midnight oil.
Commissioner Steele, you are proposing that we table all of the code or just for certain sections? Because we could move forward on some others.
Would table just this section.
The public utilities section, yeah, we could do that.
Okay.
Maybe it would be possible Sounds like
We haven't made a
Commissioner's still
decision.
getting ready to-
We haven't made a decision. She's just made a proposal and we're trying to concrete what the proposal is. Okay? Nobody's even made a motion yet, so. We have not made premature consensus.
I'm concerned we're looking at too much tonight. There's just not all of these changes, you know, and I realize the work that's gone into it, but they don't all follow one idea. It's like our government voting on a bill that has all these different things in it. There's too many things in here that, I mean, some of them affect others, but most of it is this item and this item. It would be better if it was broken out, I think.
Well, I think
I think we can do that. We can do that. Commissioner Funk, are there some, can you be specific about those that you think we're ready to go forward with?
It's mostly around the utilities though, so if we just break out the utilities, I think we're okay with the other ones.
Yeah. Would you agree to that, Commissioner Funk?
Again, I mentioned the flags just as an item that, I mean, I don't know. I don't have enough information on it. It just doesn't, you know, I know that there are other cities that have industries and like I said, car dealers, grocery stores that have huge flags. And are we going to eliminate some of those people from coming into our community because that's what they always do, and we're not going to allow it? I mean,
right now we don't have any code amendments proposed for flags. If you wanted to suggest one, we would have to bring that back later.
well, that was in here on the flags.
I didn't see that anywhere.
It's not redlined. That section is in here, but it's not redlined with any
Oh.
changes.
No proposed change.
No proposed change. Okay, then in that case, we wouldn't be voting on that.
Well, I can summarize the different sections and the different changes if that would be helpful.
Let's do that in just a minute. We had a couple other comments down here.
I'll be very brief. Discussion, I appreciate. Just to be clear, the definition that's given us on private and public utilities includes cell phone towers, transmission, that sort of thing, correct?
The definition in our code does not include that. However, cell phone tower equipment is by state definition a public utility.
So cell phone towers are public. So Section 7 also refers to cell phone towers.
Right.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So I would join in having some concern with setbacks. Also with 7A, which says there's no minimum lot size for public utilities. I understand if it's a small thing that may not be an issue, but saying a cell phone tower can be on ocean stamp type lot. Some of that is, well, a huge majority of that is safety concerns. You know, believing that one of the fundamental things our government is supposed to do is ensure the safety of its citizens. Having a cell phone tower, no minimum lot size, and without much guidance on where those could be located. I think with fencing, we should seriously consider having a sort of distance from exist. Done that already tonight with an item. We discussed it in 200 feet, existing residential or zone. I forget what it was that we were discussing, but I remember. So it was lighting.
It was cell towers and lighting. It was, well.
So I think being fiscally responsible is acknowledging that we shouldn't be paying a ton of money for fencing around a pond. You know, what you said was an 8-foot fence, which does require a little bit more than a 4-foot fence or over. And so I think just owing it to the citizens of Saratoga to get potentially having a chain that can be used as long as it's no closer than X distance, 200 feet or 700 feet or whatever that is. That closer than that, then it has a different litmus test. There was, with the issue with the berms, and I don't remember what section, I think where I was coming from is I think whatever we deem for regional park, we should also consider for every park. Say that, you know, the traffic lighting or headlights, whatever barriers we use in regional park, could be every park. A park standard that we have to shield headlights from residents where there's residential houses. And then oh, one more thing. I couldn't find it in the code just now, but there was a summary of saying that logos, banner logos or something like that would be used on backstops. And I don't know if you meant outfield fencing as well. Backstop is what's behind home plate, and usually that doesn't have logos because you want to be able to see through that on the outfield fence rather than a backstop.
Right.
Oh, okay.
As you can see, we're all very into baseball.
Mark, you talked about taking your kids to all these baseball games.
I know, and luckily they got out of the sport.
No, you know, you don't want to put any signs or logos on a backstop, at least below eye level or view from anywhere you're sitting or standing. I would say anywhere, just if it's a foul ball, you want to be able to see what the foul ball is. But change that to outfield fencing or just field fencing rather than backstop.
It might be fine in the actual draft. But let me check.
Might just verify that.
Yeah, I think it's fine in the actual draft. I think I called it field fencing, and I don't think I distinguished between the backstop and the outfield.
It, on banner signs, CI number, any number of banner signs may be placed on field fencing after receiving express approval from the city.
Okay, I just called it field fencing.
Okay.
Actual draft.
So just a couple questions here. We've had great debate already, and I don't want to add to that, but I just want to verify when we, with the definition of regional park, this is broad enough that it would extend to non-publicly owned parks as well, but privately
Right.
parked as well?
It is.
So theoretically, we're working with Dale Murphy on some sort of a Dale Murphy sports camp kind of a thing. I don't know that he would meet this requirement, but hypothetically, let's say he was doing something that met that, then yes, those would apply to him.
Okay. With the logos and stuff like that, I would like to get, as opposed to just city approval, maybe get some guidelines or criteria. What I don't want to do is essentially say, in our regional parks, we can do what we want regarding logos and signage and whatnot, but no one else gets that same privilege.
So
maybe some guidelines there that would then allow someone like a Dale Murphy, if he wanted to have some advertising on his field fencing as well, that we would allow him to do that since we seem to be okay with it on our field fencing.
So here's the irony.
It applies to regional parks, so it doesn't distinguish, or the way it's written in here doesn't distinguish between if it was ours or someone else's.
Correct, but for them to put it on their fencing, they have to have city approval. So hypothetically, the city could say no to anyone unless you're a city-owned park.
So here's the irony, and I'll point to one that we can't control. The schools are already doing this, and we can't stop them.
Can stop anything the schools do.
Right. Well, I mean, some
Except for
cases,
health and safety.
But fundamentally, I mean, they're using that to help subsidize the cost of their programs and other things, and they're doing it, and we can't stop them, and we're the only ones with handcuffs on. And so that's, I think, part of the council's discussion for that, because again, going back to fiscal sustainability, there's a lot of revenue that could be used to offset the cost of sports, and we aren't taking advantage of that because we don't allow this particular component, and so they want to consider that as an option.
I think you might have misunderstood. I'm
I know,
for us doing it.
you're
but-
saying open the door for everybody.
Yeah.
The only thing that I think is in a regional park, that's kind of where we're focusing that. We don't want to necessarily proliferate Neptune Park or Shea
Well,
Park.
I'm talking specifically, I mean, this is all about regional parks, so.
Sure,
Yes.
I think we're on the same page.
But, and with most signs, we require city approval. So I think this is, I was just pointing out that it isn't in line with our sign practice, because there are a few signs we allow without city approval.
Okay, I just don't want this to be an exclusionatory thing. I understand, like you brought up, would it be possible for a golf course to put signs along all of their fencing? I think, having us have an approval mechanism there, I would like to see some guidelines in there as far as, to give us some guidelines as a city as to what we allow and what we don't allow, so that, protects us from lawsuits in the future, and also from the standpoint of making sure we're not picking and winning winners and losers. I think that's really all I had. Thanks.
Okay, has everybody else had their say?
I just wanted to mention here since it was already brought up, on the first part you're kind of summarizing where the changes are going to be made. And on 19.18, you do have allow logos on backstops, so it does say backstop there.
Reading from the code.
Yeah, it's the summary part at the beginning.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
should we, I think we leave our planner guessing what we think might be appropriate for setbacks and fencing, and should we kind of give her some help here so she's not spending the next week spinning her wheels?
I'd love to get to that. Everybody else has had their say. I'd like to have mine, and
Okay.
then we can jump into.
Okay,
Right, does that work?
that works.
I'll try to go quick. I'm gonna go through my list. As far as the minimum lot size, as we're talking about the utilities, the lot size, lot width, lot frontage, lot coverage, setbacks, building size. Specifically, again, this goes to my proposition to split out the utilities and have different uses, have different needs there. Specifically, cell towers, there's potential for that to fall and to be hit by a car, so not really minimum size. C, it talked about the 5-foot setback. I just wanted to know what the setback was now. You said it was 50 feet. I'm not in support of the 5-foot setback unless it's specific to the utility. There are certain needs, as Mark has indicated, that would require a smaller setback. I'm okay with that, but there's specific ones that I'm not okay with. I think they need to be treated separately and differently. As far as D, it talked about there is no required fencing. That concerns me with the ability of people to climb up, physical barrier for vehicles. We talked about that. The barbed wire, that one's a toss-up. We need to do something to keep people off of the utilities. So I'm flexible to do what's needed to keep those people out. On the existing poles that are 10 foot taller in a regional commercial, I'm not in support of making them go higher in a regional commercial. Those are usually adjacent to residences, and anything we can do to keep these towers a little bit away from the residences would be landscaping, 70% max turf if we need to have more leeway in order to make our regional parks work. I'm okay with that. Screening for the parking, I see some logic in that. I mean, if you had a whole bunch of cars lined up at a baseball field and all their lights were going off, it could distract the game. So I don't want to propose anything that would stop you from the ability to even do a 3-foot. Yeah, you could still be able to see in there if you're a policeman, but maybe you have some kind of screening for lights. Color temp doesn't really, I'm not an expert on color temp, so I don't have an opinion on that. Beam lighting, I was okay with that. Chain link fencing for utilities, I think that in some instances, chain link fencing could be permitted as long as it is something to get rid of the ugly by putting something around it. Vegetation. Okay, the any zone 100-foot tower, I was concerned about that as well. That could be in a residence, 100-foot tower, so I'm not in support of that. Those are my comments. So, back to you, Commissioner Steele, on the proposition for
I did have one
giving
comment.
some guidance to the city of what they want to do.
If I could say one thing here on the cell towers in regional commercial being raised. We allow 40-foot buildings in regional commercial, correct? It's a 50. And so with that, it is possible to where you'll have cell towers surrounded by buildings that are taller than it, essentially making that cell tower in regional commercial obsolete. And so
The proposal is for 60 feet. Right now it's 40.
Right.
So, yeah, if buildings are up to 50 feet, there's possible interference from the building. So the proposal is for 60 feet in that
to get it up above the building height.
of the building.
So I support that for that reason.
All right, so did you want to lead that discussion, Commissioner Steele, on giving direction about setbacks?
If I can find where I've got it. Oh, right here. And I'm going from the 220, the definition. So, because that puts A through H, and that pretty well covers, I think you did a good job in covering that. So, again, and I think on our fencing, it's unreasonable to maybe to require wrought iron fencing around a pond or a reservoir but are we really being unreasonable to ask the gas company to do either wrought iron or the block that they've done? So, you know, I don't know what the size would be, 1/8 of an acre or whatever. If it's smaller than that, then they put in the wrought iron, and then anything bigger than that? Can the city afford that?
Well, sorry, if I could address that question. If you recall, we built a gas pump station out in the middle of the church's crop fields, and we required them to put a rock wall around it. And that was so that we couldn't see into it. And they were at the time pleading, saying, please let us have something that we can see through so that we can keep eyes on it. And yet we required them to hide it. And they were very, you know, it was an extra cost, but they preferred that to vinyl fencing. And so they opted to go with the rock wall. This is one of those ones where I happen to think that it makes sense to be able to get eyes on things. And although it might be ugly looking as a transformer or a gas station or something, it's a small sacrifice to have, I think, a better level of service. I mean, there could be things going wrong that because you can't see it, it's a bad thing. So as far as the wrought iron conversation, you know, if you're asking my personal opinion, my professional opinion is you and the council get to make that decision. So congratulations. You ask my personal opinion, does it really matter if we have a few patches of chain link across the city? I mean, it's not like we're proposing a proliferation of, you know, something that.
Can we ask the staff then to look at the feasibility of compromise for what all the stakeholders that are pulling on this, like fiscal, visual, all that stuff, to say maybe designate certain corridors in our city where chain link is not permitted. Like I said, I have the issue I have with the cell tower is where it is. It happens to be in a place where we're trying to beautify. I mean, we've got trees in the medium of the streets. We have trees in parking lots. We are trying to make it as pretty as we can, and it's starting to look really good in that area. Eventually, I guess now that the city center is moving towards the Pioneer Crossing area, eventually that'll get there. But right now it's pretty ugly. But eventually it will. So maybe certain corridors we say no chain link fence, but anywhere else it's okay because it is in the middle of a field, or it's closer to the outskirts, or or it's closer to an industrial area, you know, whatever. But I just don't want to see this big thing that's going to be identified as the Eiffel Tower of Saratoga Springs right in the main corridor and have chain link fence around it. You know, that's my issue.
Yeah,
Mark had a comment.
Oh,
Yeah.
on that topic, we do have, at the corner of Pony Express and 800, you know, Future Foothill or whatever, we have 2 pump houses, and they have the wrought iron fence and some xeriscaping, and they look really nice in a prominent location. Everyone will see it. Then we also have water tanks up the hill that nobody sees. Eventually, development might encroach upon it, but chain link still makes sense, even if development encroaches on those. So, and I think it comes down to a visibility perspective. If, you know, for highly visible sites or sites right up against the street or things like that, perhaps the nicer fence makes more sense.
It's a bigger issue. I wanted to go back and address one thing, and I think that there, if I'm not mistaken, I heard you, Kirk, say that all utilities had to have fences around them. I agree with you on the cell tower. The no fence requirement, we were thinking of a couple of scenarios, and let me give you 2 examples of why we wouldn't want a fence. One is the booster station on Grandview Boulevard. It's just a standalone building, and it doesn't require necessarily fencing around it because it's completely self-contained. The other one is actually a well that is in a park up off of Maverick in the Jacobs Ranch area. And we actually have a pavilion built onto it, and it's in the center of a park, and it doesn't require any sort of fencing around it. And so we wanted to have the flexibility to say, we don't need a fence. So in those cases, we can blend it into it.
I didn't say that all utilities had to have.
Okay, but
I said all utilities should be dealt with separately.
Okay.
So that you can, and I think that goes to the point.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we were trying to do, was give ourselves flexibility so we didn't have to put a fence around something if it didn't make any sense, because we could utilize it for, you know, put a pavilion off of one half of it and make it into a picnic area or whatever.
Okay, well.
I apologize if I misunderstood.
The gas treatment plant, and I'm gas treatment plant, reservoir tank, or other storage facility. This is where I think we need some help from our public works. I don't, you know, how tall is it? You know, what is the treatment plant for gas? That's something I'm not familiar with, but I think there could be odor from that if it's a treatment plant. I've seen them in California that have the big, they were round tanks where they do gas, they treat gas. In that one,
I think maybe the city, I mean, the city has the best information of what kind of issues they're dealing with today, what kind of safety requirements there are, what kind of laws, whatever. I don't think that we're qualified to make the first stab at it. I think maybe we just say, okay, let's split it out and let the city visit it and see what kind of setbacks and requirements they need, and bring it back to us, and then go from there.
That sounds like some kind of satellite, farm. You could have several dishes. Spanish Fork, where I live, they've got their own communication system, but they do have some dishes out in a city, on city property. I'm guessing that's probably what that refers to.
I agree with Commissioner Wilkinson. We just had the city take it back, or the staff take it back.
Just let me give a little more foreshadowing, and it's the more global thing. We need to get a salt storage shed put up in the near future to protect our salt piles and things of that nature. Our current code requires us to build a physical building, to have multiple types of architectural elements, multiple things on it. For us to buy just a salt dome, basically, it'd be about $150,000. It's going to be 3 times that amount to build a structure, and where our public works site is still in flux and transition, it's going to be hugely expensive. And so that's one of those utility type conversations that we want to be able to have the flexibility to be able to do, because that's the industry standard. And for us to go out and build a building for 3 times the cost and not nearly the flexibility, not nearly the expandability, all of those kinds of components, it's a challenge for us. So we'll be having similar conversations on some additional items as well as we come forward. Prime example, again, on that same front, we have a tough shed that we want to install down at the Public Works facility. Unfortunately, it's slightly more than 200 square feet. Therefore, it triggers a site plan review and all kinds of different things, when in reality, if we could just get it down just slightly smaller, it would go unnoticed. And so those are the kinds of things that we're running up against in trying to be fiscally responsible and things of that nature. So expect more of those conversations as well. If we've got a couple more weeks, we've already talked internally about some of these things. We'll slap some of those into this as well. So there'll be some new components, but it'll be along this same line of, we've got to cover the salt, otherwise we're out of EPA compliance.
So I propose we just leave out, we continue or table the utilities section, but we could continue with, but we can probably vote on the other sections.
I'll entertain a motion.
Can I make a change first?
Sure.
There's one more item that I noticed. We're on this is on 190503, item 3, under G, where we have all the height limits on the poles. And we're changing the regional commercial item XVI from 40 to 60. Everything that we have that's over 40 feet, we have marked with an asterisk. I would like an asterisk on that also.
Everyone else agree?
Is this in the section
Cell tower height.
cell towers? I think we're tabling cell towers altogether.
Okay, well, that's an item. I mean, you'll want that in there just because you're saying anything next to residential then drops it down to 40 feet, and everything else is marked. That's the only one that's not marked, and the reason it's not is it just changed from 40 to 60 yard we're looking at changing.
But again, dropping it to 40 doesn't make sense if the buildings are 50.
Well, but if it's next to residential, that will discourage them from putting it in to begin with. Right.
I know, but are we trying to discourage them, or are we trying to make sense in the code? Because it doesn't make sense in the code to drop it to 40 when the buildings are 50.
If it drops it to 40, they're not gonna put it there.
Right. But again, are we trying to discourage development, or are we trying to make sense of the code? Right now, we're trying to make sense of the code.
We're trying to discourage development of cell towers next to residential, yes.
By dropping it to 40?
Yes, that was it. It's next to, but by putting that asterisk there, it's saying if it's next to residential,
Within 200 feet of residential.
Right, but specific to regional commercial, we allow buildings that are 50.
Right, so they wouldn't do it.
This just seems to be a really complicated way to manipulate people's behavior. I think we're just trying to make sense of the code. It doesn't make sense to drop it below the buildings around it.
Again, I think we're gonna table this one. We can all think about this one. The whole cell tower section, I believe and the utilities, I believe those were. It is.
Well, the setbacks, yeah, sorry, the setbacks. The setbacks under the 1915, which is the section, would be related to cell tower site. This other section, though, is related to so 1905 is related to heights in the.
This is 1905 that I'm talking.
It doesn't sound like we have a consensus. Maybe we need. How does everybody feel about the change from 40 to 50 feet in the residential commercial? I've stated that I didn't. Sorry, was it 60? Sorry, RC.
I'm fine with it. I mean, it just makes sense.
Yeah. I agree as long as there's an asterisk behind it. I don't like it without the asterisk because I don't want it near residential.
We could vote on each section, choose to. So this particular section has a. Yeah, we don't have to, but.
We have a lot of opinions tonight.
No, well, it just doesn't make sense to tell that it goes to 40. I mean, that's where it is today.
Goes to 40.
No, but in those other zones, there is no height allowance of 50 feet for any structure. Regional commercial does allow it.
I understand what you're saying, Commissioner Funk, which is, let's say you got a regional commercial area and then it abuts a residential area, and we've got a cell phone tower sitting 100 feet from the residential area, you could only do the 40 feet at that point. And I get that.
Exactly.
I understand that. But at the same time, typically, if we are going to have residential right next to regional commercial, that's typically going to be high density, again, stacked units, taller units. Again, we're going to need the height of the cell phone tower to get over them.
Not always true.
Yeah, I was gonna.
There are a few.
The Maverick going in.
There's
right
a
there.
few
That's
few
within.
exceptions, but the vast majority of our regional commercial in this area also is abutted by high density as a way to buffer out the impact of regional commercial to residential.
Yeah, and also remember that residential commercial allows for big box stores like Home Depot and Walmart and all this.
So,
so a resident already knows that exists.
Well,
If there's 50-foot tall buildings, who cares if there's 10 more feet?
But what if all the buildings are 40 foot? 50 foot is the maximum they can go. They could all be 40 foot.
Sure, but you're
and
surrounded
so you
by.
can still put a tower in there.
But you've got your home. You're surrounded now. You've got Walmart across the street. You've got Best Buy across the street, and you've got a 60-foot cell phone tower. I have a hard time feeling that that extra 20 feet all of a sudden becomes this huge eyesore that you as the resident says, well, that is just unacceptable to me. I mean, if anything, the fact that you've got a Walmart across the street from you is going to be the thing that's really going to capture your eye. So I think it becomes in a regional commercial, I feel like it becomes an unnecessary requirement to keep it from within 200 feet from residential, personally.
Of that you really need that asterisk in there.
But is it really a matter of regional commercial, or is it just that no cell phone tower should be within a certain amount of residential, no matter what zone it's in?
That, I think, is the key right there.
Now we're back to impacts.
Yeah, and also remember, people do move. Yeah, people like the small town feel and all that stuff, but they all have their cell phones. And to say that there are no cell towers near residential, I mean, we just listen to the coverage issues. I mean, it's just
200
to 40 feet. It doesn't provide the kinds of coverage. It's not business. I mean, are we really arguing about a 10-foot difference
No, we're talking
No, it's 10
about.
foot. It's 50 feet. 50 feet is the resident.
Well, it's going from 40 to 60.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is, in regional commercial, buildings are allowed to be 50 feet tall. Yeah, so it's a 10-foot difference.
I agree with Commissioner Kilgore that that until I looked it up to see how tall a building or a regional commercial building could be, I was concerned. But I think that Commissioner Funk is right that we probably should think about putting the asterisk there. We have a lot of regional commercial that is right next to residential. And then I think that we do have to serve our constituents and when we're thinking about this. And so the asterisk does not give me a problem. It's just that in regional commercial, like I think that Walmart would probably be able to put 100 or a 60 foot without a problem.
And what about the person that has the home there first? And the regional commercial comes in afterwards.
Then why don't we just make it explicit in the code that you can't build cell towers that close to residential? Why play games and saying you have to make it 40 feet? That will discourage everybody. I mean, why can't they build a 50-foot tower if all the buildings around are 40? I mean, you see what I'm saying? I don't like the idea of trying to trying to manipulate behavior based on tricks like, well, it's 40 feet, they won't want to build it because the buildings are 50 feet, so that's going to keep them from doing it. Why don't we just explicitly say it if we don't like it? We could just say, we don't like cell towers larger than 40 feet, 200 feet from any residential. I mean, at least that way we're not playing games and trying to manipulate behavior through tricks.
I like that. I can go with that.
Is that legally recognizable basis? That's the question, because you have to adhere to the Telecommunications Act of 1996.
I would suggest if that's the direction that you want to go as a body, then we probably need Kevin to draft that language specifically and make sure it's compliant. So for tonight, I mean, we've kind of been hung up. I don't know. I mean, if there's enough people that want to pass it as is, then you can charge ahead. If there's consensus to make a change or allow to make a change, then it's definitely going to have to wait until we've got our attorney to review that.
And how do we know if it's 200? No, I mean, how do we know the appropriate distance? How do we know it's 200 feet?
You have 300 feet for resident fueling stations from parks and schools. 500 feet, that's right.
So I mean, the city's coming back with recommendations on setbacks for public utilities because they have expertise in public utilities. I don't know that the city has expertise in cell phones.
And even the experts differ in cell phone technology.
So maybe that's
and the government differs with other studies, and so there's no consensus there.
Maybe that's something the city can research and consider and come back with a recommendation.
I don't think 10 feet is worth it.
So, can we give some direction to our legal counsel, something they wanted to review so that we can move forward?
So is there enough support to pass it now? On that particular section? So
On the cell table,
On the height of
RC height
the RC
40.
zone.
tabling, yes,
Or just that table, I'm sorry, just that,
section.
well, not the section, but the whole section is okay, except for that one little table. You know, the table where you have all the heights?
It's right here.
Yeah, just that table, that's it. Everything else we could probably we're okay with.
Well, there's some changes that need to, that
Yeah,
we've
this
made.
needed to be discussed more on any public.
Yeah, so again, that's just that table, right?
Right, that's
Yeah.
2 locations related to height. So you could approve the other things in here if you chose to.
If we table
The
something
only
though, it has to have some direction. It can't just be that we're tabling it to put it off later. We need to have some direction so that we have some traction with it.
So you could vote on each chapter, not each section, but each chapter. You know, so chapter 1905, the sections that are in here, there weren't any comments on this first part, or I mean, I just added them in. Actually, they were very small. It was changing monopole to antenna right there. That was the only change there based on the comments.
And
then
remove.
I struck roof mounted. So, and then
Well, we're all okay with those. It's just
yeah,
that
and
one.
then there weren't any comments on these, and then the only comments we're getting now are on these 2, so the 60-foot height and then the 100-foot height right here. So we're getting comments on that hasn't reached a consensus, and then this whole section was moved. So you could vote on this chapter,
Can I,
other than the height, if you chose.
if you're not passing it all, I would suggest tabling all of it. Just
We're not
for-
stopping anything right now. No decisions.
I was worried about
no
the
construction
timelines,
No,
timelines.
on the cell tower thing, I would just as soon you table the whole thing. And I don't have legal counsel here, but my gut feeling tells me you probably don't want to do part and parcel for a variety of reasons.
Well, we can
It's
go
cleaner
ahead.
just to continue all of it.
Well, what about going ahead with the 1909, which is off-street parking and all of that? or you
All of
wanna-
the rest of the changes, I would, if, it sounds like you're hung up on the public utility section and the cell sections.
Right.
With everything with that exception would be, I think, a tremendous successful night.
Does everybody
So
agree?
charge forward on that.
Does everybody agree that those are the only 2 items that we're hung up on? Okay. So we could act tonight. I would like to see us act. Now, if we are, here's the other thing.
At 10 o'clock.
If we are tabling those 2 items, we need to know what we're tabling them for and why and what we're directing staff to do.
But I think we've all been pretty clear on that during our discussion. I don't think we need to do that in a motion.
Well, we would want to do the motion on the utilities to split out the utilities separately. I think a few of us talked about that, and deal with the setbacks and the other rules on
I don't
those
think we need to have
separately.
that as a condition to
No, just a direction to staff. So,
I think we've already been, I guess my point is, I think you guys have been very clear on what you want.
yeah.
Sarah, do you feel like we need any more discussion on that, or do you feel like you got it?
No, I have great notes.
Okay, well, just a minute. Just a minute. One person at a time. Go ahead. So we're going to separate the utilities and how we treat them for setbacks, for heights, fencing. Is there anything else? And yeah, setbacks. I think that's it.
Lot size.
And lot size. Okay, and the other one, what's our table for that? For the height of antennas? If we're tabling that, cell phone towers, whatever.
It was about minimum heights for towers.
Yeah, if we're tabling that, that's just us to go back and think about it and then come back.
No.
What are we going to do?
But it sounds like we're just, it sounds like we're not unhappy with the verbiage. It sounds like we just disagree. on
Okay,
the-
well, in that case, I would recognize a motion, and then we vote on it, and we either go forward with a positive or a negative.
I think.
We can act on that.
I think we need to follow our city manager's legal.
He did say, though, that if we passed everything except for those 2 items, we'd have a successful night.
Yeah, I think so.
But,
No, okay, so
Except for those 2 sections.
with
but
the
could
cell
we do
phone-
the 1915 and could we do 1905 and everything else and just not do 1915 and still be okay with your concern.
There is nothing that we could ask the staff to do more on
The
heights.
heights. We just disagree.
I mean, we've
And
already
that's
got,
okay.
we have input from Sprint, we have
Yeah.
the pictures that Sarah took. There's really nothing else you can do
Well,
to
but
help us.
I did hear a question about, and this is what Commissioner Funk was going for, was within a certain distance of residential zones. And so I think that we probably could lend some information on that, but I would like Kevin to research if there's any sort of information or standard that's there. And that's the one thing that I think is there, and then ultimately it'll probably come back and you're still gonna have to either vote it up or vote it down and make a decision that might be painful, so.
I think it's valuable that we
but I-
consult our attorney.
I would like to
that
get a
item.
little information on that, and then I think as we've filtered through the utility question, it may help, because I heard several times it come back to cell towers. Well, we don't want a cell tower with a 5-foot setback.
Split it.
And so we probably can sort through some of those issues, and I think that it might help make the conversation a little easier next time.
Mr. Chair, I
Yes, ma'am.
believe there was one XX triple I. Then I believe our planner has said that we probably would want some discussion.
On the 100 feet
Any zone.
down, agreed.
So I think we need to bring that back, and that be reworded some way.
Agreed. I think that's the other section we were going to table.
All right, so we're back to 1905 and continuing 1905 and 1915,
And,
voting on everything else.
I
And,
think we agree on that.
and,
We're going to do all of 1905.
Let's do it all.
and 1902.02, which is the definition, and we may be adding salt stations and other things that our city would like to put in there. So I think we ought to hold off on that one.
That'll be part of the split for utilities.
That was part of the utility section.
It's the definition.
It's the definition. Okay. We can always amend the definition as well next time, so if it's in a spot where you want it, change it, and then we'll just work from the new draft.
So we're just continuing 1905 and 1915, voting everything else up or down.
Yes, and then we're going to take a break.
Yes.
I'll entertain a motion.
Okay. I got to get to the end of this thing now. Hold on. Based upon the arguments and discussions today, where'd it go? I move that we continue sections 1905 and 1915. Do we do this in two different motions?
That'd be fine.
Okay.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. Is there a question on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. I'll entertain a motion for the remaining items in number 5.
Based upon the discussions and arguments today on the rest of the items, I move that we forward a positive recommendation to council for the the code changes with the changes made by Sarah today during our discussion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any question on that motion?
Oh, yes.
Commissioner Steele.
No, you.
Okay, I'll take it. You
Over here
clean up the
first.
mess. Okay, so we had discussions about what we're gonna do with parking, regional parks, shielding of lights, inclusion with that. We had discussion about what we're doing with interior lighting, with a certain height requirement, acknowledging that Neptune Park is now.
Shielding and lighting.
And
Wait,
the thing about
before we go on, did you want to propose something to he who has made the motion?
Otherwise known as he who has the power.
Yes,
Speak
you can ask the
nicely.
question of those two. They are the ones who have the motion on the table right now.
What those should be.
Okay?
Yeah.
And the other one that I immediately see is the tree, all required trees shall be outside of the area of the power transmission, so that we don't have someone come in, try to circumvent it, because if they can, eventually they will.
What was that one? I don't remember that discussion.
The tree height in, under.
It's up here. It's this here.
If I could clarify that, we require the undergrounding of all power poles except for the massive kilowatt poles. And so you could even get just more, I mean, if you just tied it to those power lines, it actually, everything else would be corrected because as part of their development, they're going to be undergrounding those lines anyway.
Except the new code doesn't require power lines to be undergrounded if they are in the rear.
I don't think we need that section. We can delete both of these because but the required tree without saying it. And then there's a section further down here that says you can't use trees under children's cities.
So without having a lack of a better idea at this point,
I think we can just strike these and
Is
there's
that okay
overkill on our part.
with?
Yeah, that is okay. I would also amend my motion to include changes to the section on screening to require a 3-foot berm or screening as is consistent with other parts of the code. And
What about
the
the
lighting, the
lighting?
25-foot lighting within, it was like within 200 feet of residences, right? Right now, we don't have that stipulation in there, and you wanted to add that, correct?
Right, we have it for all non-residential that would go in next to residential. And we have one more under landscaping, talking about manicured or improved or landscape. Did you get that one?
I thought she just changed it to landscape.
I struck the word.
But it's not, she struck manicured, but I thought we were going to replace that with landscape. I thought you had done that.
Didn't, but I can.
I thought
Okay.
that was kind of,
What was the landscaping part?
you did replacing manicured with the
That one on
landscape.
fixtures, I guess.
So,
Will you just find that in your motion?
well, I just said all
All
the
accepted.
changes that have been made. I guess that one had not been made at that point, so yes, I'd like to include
Are
that
we
in my motion.
striking this here about under 10?
Yes.
This is a very complex motion.
It
And
is.
is our second okay with all of these changes?
Yeah, I had already assumed that we accepted what.
Yeah, so just to make, I'm still a little unclear on the lighting. All we want is the lighting, we're okay with the 25 feet, we just want it to be more than 200 feet away from residential's. And we just need that added to the code.
At the time of installation? Because
Yes.
I'm not going to go back and retrofit the park.
Yes.
Well, to be consistent, you might need to make it residentially zoned ground, and we don't have any residentially zoned ground around that.
Theoretically, PC has everything. PC has all of that within its code, so I think that would be difficult. I mean, the obvious thing for me to just say is the council's already selected the light package.
Once it's installed, it's grandfathered.
Yeah, so,
It applies to the old code.
yeah, so I would say that's a great solution. Ultimately, though, the council may have differing opinion on it, and they may alter it as they.
I would go with 25 feet from existing residential.
Well, it's
200 feet from existing residential, not 25.
That,
Okay, so shall we summarize?
I have one more question.
Oh, here we have another question.
It's too long.
Does the motion of berms or other shielding material give the city enough leeway to shield lighting in the most cost-effective way? That language.
So,
Cost-effective is flat.
Well,
But it still has to shield the lighting. It still has to shield lighting.
Right, well, that doesn't
So-
show lighting.
right now it says berm, hedge, or screen wall, and we were wanting to allow the regional park to have planter beds, so it can still be, and the commission isn't agreeing with that, so we can just strike that proposal, and then the city would still have to have a berm, a hedge,
Or shrubbery.
yeah,
which would be the hedge, I
Hey,
think.
it's all right.
But,
That would be
I mean,
the
the purpose, I mean, those are specific ways you can do it, but the purpose is we don't want lights to be obtrusive onto adjacent areas or interfering with the players but I want the city to have enough. That's the intent. I want the city to have enough leeway to say this is how the best way we can do that.
There's
we're talking
25
about
foot
that
lighting,
No,
and
this-
then we have the berm that is
this is
3
the
foot
berm.
high that shields cars light onto the field.
Yeah, this is the specific to the headlights.
Got it.
Right.
It wouldn't be onto the field, isn't it onto the roadway nearby?
Both.
Yeah,
Both.
right.
You're pulling in on.
So
direct-
so for me personally, as the person with the condition on the table, I would prefer to keep this consistent with the rest of code because the reasoning behind it does not change regardless of whether the city, it's a public nuisance thing, and if we are requiring this from businesses and stuff like that to prevent the public nuisance, we need to require the same thing from the city to prevent the public nuisance.
But I remind,
Huh?
but I remind you that the comment from city manager was that it already is the comment, and that if we're trying to talk about the reasoning for it, then why didn't we require it for some of the parks that are already installed? And it just becomes a size issue. We do it under the regional park, or under the regional park. So your argument is correct. It's just that it doesn't apply. It may not apply in this circumstance. If we make it consistent throughout, because we already don't allow it. We already didn't require it for other parks that are in there. It's just a size issue, not a lighting issue.
Based upon acreage.
Yeah.
20 acres.
So just, I'll foreshadow a little bit. After we went out to bid for the park, it came in about $5 million more than it should have. We are going back and we are regrading the whole park, and we're removing 100,000 yards of fill that was required to do it. I mean, the site plan's staying the same, but the site's dropping substantially. And so, yeah, we're removing 100, or we've taken out of the design 100,000 yards of material, which will save us roughly $1 million. And so it's counterintuitive. I'm just going to point to this. It's counterintuitive to say you now need to bring more fill in when the overall goal is to reduce the whole site of the facility in the first place. So it may already have some of that feature built into it because we're dropping the site, but this is a pretty big fiscal issue, because what we're doing here triggers out across the whole 30 acres, and so we're looking at it in a different way. So
in the springtime, we'll have a swimming pool.
We like to think of them as
retention basins.
But
Okay.
I'm just suggesting that there's some reasons why we're doing some of the things that we're doing, and I've given 2 examples, one on each of the regional parks. One is it's at the top of a hill, and we would be adding slope to be able to make that work, and the other is the
Or you just
specific
plant some shrubs.
Okay, so
Or some shrubs.
back to where we're supposed to be. Motion is on the table. Let's summarize what it is. We had 4 points. We had 4 different changes. One was trees outside the power transmission.
That was stricken, so we're good to go there.
Stricken. Shielding, you were proposing that it would
I am
be
proposing that we
require-
remove the exemption for regional parks for shielding.
Wait.
That was not what we.
It was not exemption. It was about intermittent.
Well, it was a change to intermittent, so it was a regional car park exception.
So you're proposing that it become
That we
intermittent?
just remove that exception so that it follows the same as is in the upper parts of the code.
Okay, and then the lighting, 200 feet.
The
from
lighting that we
residential.
add a requirement that it be, we're fine with 25 feet lighting, it just needs to be 200 feet away from existing residential.
At time of installation.
Okay, I've added everything you've mentioned.
All right.
Is that
I'm
okay
okay
with
with
our
that.
second?
I second.
Well, you can't, 'cause
She
this is-
can.
Well,
Well, we
but-
had a second on the table.
Yeah.
I am having an issue now because I'm swayed by Mark's argument.
Which is?
Do allow me.
So in the case that our second disagrees, then we don't have a second.
Why withdraw that someone else?
We withdraw the second.
Someone else
We don't have to vote on it, and then we have to ask if we have a second. Am I wrong as a matter of procedure? Okay, so our second has withdrawn. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Have a second. Any questions on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
You have one opposition. So noted. Okay, we're gonna take a 5-minute break.
Well, I'm wondering, since we're gonna table cell tower,
Oh, you wanna just finish up this number 5?
you can do whatever you want, but
Yeah, I'll entertain a motion for the remaining items, which is cell towers. Or was it utilities?
Well, no,
We did that first. Hayden,
sorry, the next item on the agenda is the AT&T cell tower. And so I'm wondering if you want to, if that needs to be tabled since the code amendments related to that. Since the way it's proposed, it couldn't be approved without changes to the setback.
That is true, because
And that
it
got
is
tabled, which means that you could either, you don't have to table it, you could recommend denial, or you could table it.
well, yeah, you could. It is an administrative decision based upon the current code, and we have not proposed any change to the code yet. If we did make a decision tonight,
Take a break.
so let's take a break. 5 minutes.
doing the same thing.
Oh, the fun.
Intermittent. It's a recommendation. Yeah.
They brought up the issues that they can make their own opinion.
Does that include shrubs like